Transition by Algernon Blackwood, a Christmas ghost story. John Mudbury was on his way home from the shops, his arms full of Christmas presents. It was after 6 o'clock and the streets were very crowded. He was an ordinary man, lived in an ordinary suburban flat with an ordinary wife and ordinary children. He didn't think them ordinary, but everybody else did. He had ordinary presents for each one, a cheap blotter for his wife, a cheap air gun for the boy, and so forth. He was over 50, bald, in an office, decent in mind and habits, of uncertain opinions, uncertain politics, and uncertain religion. Yet he considered himself a decided, positive gentleman, quite unaware that the morning newspaper determined his opinions for the day. He just lived from day to day. Physically, he was fit enough, except for a weak heart, which never troubled him. And his summer holiday was bad golf, while the children bathed and his wife read Garvice on the sands. Like the majority of men, he dreamed idly of the past, muddled away the present, and guessed vaguely, after imaginative reading on occasions, at the future. "I'd like to survive all right," he said, "provided it's better than this," surveying his wife and children and thinking of his daily toil. "Otherwise," and he shrugged his shoulders, as a brave man should. He went to church regularly, but in church nothing convinced him that he did survive, just as nothing in church enticed him into hoping that he would. On the other hand, nothing in life persuaded him that he didn't, wouldn't, couldn't. "I'm an evolutionist," he loved to say to thoughtful cronies over a glass, having never heard that Darwinism had been questioned. And so he came home gaily, happily, with his bunch of Christmas presents for the wife and little ones, stroking himself upon their keen enjoyment and excitement. The night before, he'd taken the wife to see Magic at a select London theatre where the intellectuals went, and had been extraordinarily stirred. He had gone questioningly, yet expecting something out of the common. "It's not musical," he warned her, "nor farce, nor comedy, so to speak." And in answer to her question as to what the critics had said, he had wriggled, sighed, and put his gaudy necktie straight 4 times in quick succession. On no man in the street, with any claim to self-respect, could be expected to understand what the critics had said, even if he understood the play. And John answered truthfully, "Oh, they just said things, but the theatre's always full, and that's the only test." And just now, as he crossed the crowded circus to catch his bus, it chanced that his mind, having glimpsed an advertisement, was full of this particular play, or rather of the effect it had produced upon him at the time. For it had thrilled him, inexplicably, with its marvellous speculative hint, its big audacity, its alert and spiritual beauty. Thought plunged to find something, plunged after this bizarre suggestion of a bigger universe, after this quasi-jocular suggestion that man is not the only, then dashed full tilt against a sentence that memory thrust beneath his nose. Science does not exhaust the universe, and at the same time dashed full tilt against destruction of another kind as well. How it happened, he never exactly knew. He saw a monster glaring at him with eyes of blazing fire. It was horrible. It rushed upon him. He dodged. Another monster met him round the corner. Both came at him simultaneously. He dodged again, a leap that might have cleared a hurdle easily. But it was too late. Between the pair of them, his heart literally in his gullet, he was mercilessly caught. Bones crunched. There was a soft sensation, icy cold and hot as fire. Horns and voices roared, battering rams he saw, and a carapace of iron. Then, dazzling light. "Always face the traffic," he remembered with a frantic yell, and by some extraordinary luck escaped miraculously onto the opposite pavement. There was no doubt about it. By the skin of his teeth, he had dodged a rather ugly death. First, he felt for his presents. All was safe. And then, instead of congratulating himself and taking breath, he hurried homewards, on foot, which proved that his mind had lost control a bit, thinking only how disappointed the wife and children would have been if anything had happened. Another thing he realized, oddly enough, was that he no longer really loved his wife, but had only a great affection for her. What made him think of that? Heaven only knows, but he did think of it. He was an honest man without pretense. This came as a discovery somehow. He turned a moment and saw the crowd gathered about the entangled taxicabs, policemen's helmets gleaming in the lights of the shop windows, then hurried on again. His thoughts full of the joy his presence would give, of the scampering children, and of his wife, bless her silly heart, eyeing the mysterious parcel. And, though he could never explain how, he presently stood at the door of the jail-like building that contained his flat, having walked the whole 3 miles. His thoughts had been so busy and absorbed that he had hardly noticed the length and weary trudge. Besides, he reflected, thinking of the narrow escape, I've had a nasty shock. It was a damn near thing, now I come to think of it. He still felt a bit shaky and bewildered, yet, at the same time, he felt extraordinarily jolly and light-hearted. He counted his Christmas parcels, hugged himself in anticipatory joy, and let himself in swiftly with his latchkey. I'm late, he realized, but when she sees the brown paper parcel, she'll forget to say a word. God bless the old faithful soul. And he softly used the key a second time and entered his flat on tiptoe. In his mind was the master impulse of that afternoon, the pleasure those Christmas presents would give his wife and children. He heard a noise. He hung up hat and coat in the poky vestibule, they never called it hall, and moved softly towards the parlour door, holding the packages behind him. Only of them he thought, not of himself, of his family, that is, not of the packages. Pushing the door cunningly ajar, he peeped in shyly. To his amazement, the room was full of people. He withdrew quickly, wondering what it meant. A party? And without his knowing about it? Extraordinary. Keen disappointment came over him, but as he stepped back, the vestibule he saw was full of people too. He was uncommonly surprised, yet somehow not surprised at all. People were congratulating him. There was a perfect mob of them. Moreover, he knew them all, vaguely remembered them at least, and they all knew him. Isn't it a game? Laughed someone, patting him on the back. They haven't the least idea. And the speaker, it was old John Palmer, the bookkeeper at the office, emphasized the they. Not the least idea, he answered with a smile, saying something he didn't understand. Yet he knew he was right. His face apparently showed the utter bewilderment he felt. The shock of the collision had been greater than he realized. Evidently, his mind was wandering. Possibly. Only the odd thing was, he'd never felt so clear-headed in his life. 10,000 things grew simple suddenly, but how thickly these people pressed about him, and how familiarly. My parcels, he said, joyously pushing his way across the throng. These are Christmas presents I've brought for them. He nodded toward the room. I've saved for weeks, stopped cigars and billiards and several other good things to buy them. Good man, said Palmer with a happy laugh. It's the heart that counts. Mudbury looked at him. Palmer had said an amazing truth, only people would hardly understand and believe him, would they? Eh? He asked, feeling stuffed and stupid, muddled somewhere between two meanings, one of which was gorgeous and the other stupid beyond belief. If you please, Mr. Mudbury, step inside. They're expecting you, said a kindly, pompous voice, and turning sharply, he met the gentle, foolish eyes of Sir James Epiphany, the director of the bank where he worked. The effect of the voice was instantaneous from long habit. They are. He smiled from his heart, and advanced as from the custom of many years. Oh, how happy and gay he felt. His affection for his wife was real. Romance indeed had gone, but he needed her, and she needed him, and the children, Millie, Bill, and Jean. He deeply loved them. Life was worth living indeed. In the room was a crowd, but an astounding silence. John Mudbury looked around him. He advanced towards his wife, who sat in the corner armchair with Millie on her knee. A lot of people talked and moved about. Momentarily the crowd increased. He stood in front of them, in front of Millie and his wife, and he spoke, holding out his packages. It's Christmas Eve. he whispered shyly, "and I brought you something. Something for everybody. Look." He held the packages before their eyes. Of course, said a voice behind them, "but you may hold them out like that for a century. They'll never see them." "Of course they won't, but I love to do the old sweet thing," replied John Mudbury, then wondered with a gasp of stark amazement why he said it. "I think," whispered Milly, staring round her. "Well, what do you think?" her mother asked sharply. "You're always thinking something odd." "I think," the girl continued dreamily, "that Daddy's already here." She paused, then added with a child's impossible conviction, "I'm sure he is. I feel him." There was an extraordinary laugh. Sir James Epiphany laughed. The others, the whole crowd of them, also turned their heads and smiled. But the mother, thrusting the child away from her, rose up suddenly with a violent start. Her face had turned to chalk. She stretched her arms out into the air before her. She gasped and shivered. There was anguish in her eyes. "Look," repeated John, "these are the presents that I brought." But his voice apparently was soundless, and with a spasm of icy pain, he remembered that Palmer and Sir James, some years ago, had died. "It's magic," he cried, "but I love you, Ginny. I love you, and I've always been true to you, as true as steel. We need each other. Oh, can't you see? We go on together, you and I, forever and ever." "Think," interrupted an exquisitely tender voice. "Don't shout. They can't hear you now." And turning, John Mudbury met the eyes of Everard Minturn, their president of the year before. Minturn had gone down with the Titanic. He dropped his parcels then. His heart gave an enormous leap of joy. He saw her face, the face of his wife, look through him. But the child gazed straight into his eyes. She saw him. The next thing he knew was that he heard something tinkling far, far away. It sounded miles below him, inside him. He was sounding himself, all utterly bewildering, like a bell. It was a bell. Milly stooped down and picked the parcels up. Her face shone with happiness and laughter. But a man came in soon after. A man with a ridiculous solemn face, a pencil and a notebook. He wore a dark blue helmet. Behind him came a string of other men. They carried something. He couldn't see exactly what it was. But when he pressed forward through the laughing throng to gaze upon it, he dimly made out 2 eyes, a nose, a chin, a deep red smear, and a pair of folded hands upon an overcoat. A woman's form fell down upon them, and he heard soft sounds of children weeping strangely, and other sounds, as of familiar voices laughing gaily. "They'll join us presently. It goes like a flash." And turning with great happiness in his heart, he saw that Sir James had said it, holding Palmer by the arm as with some natural yet unexpected love of sympathetic friendship. "Come on," said Palmer, smiling like a man who accepts a gift in universal fellowship. "Let's help them. They'll never understand. Still, we can always try." The entire throng moved up with laughter and amusement. It was a moment of hearty, genuine life at last. Delight and joy and peace were everywhere. Then John Mudbury realized the truth, that he was dead. So that was a short story, transitioned by Algernon Blackwood. Not the best title either. I think I might have to subtitle it A Christmas Ghost Story. But he wasn't interested in marketing. He was interested in telling stories that said something. Fair play to Algernon. It's not the first we've done of his. We've done a few of his stories. Not yet done the Willows or the Wendigo. I probably will do the Willows first. Not sure about the Wendigo. But I've done Descent into Egypt, I've done The Man Whom the Trees Loved, maybe done some other stuff. But Blackwood's well known to the channel anyway, and so he should be as well. Let's say something about his bio. So Algernon Blackwood, born 1869 into a wealthy family. He was the son of a former playboy known as Beauty Blackwood, who'd undergone a radical transformation during the Crimean War, becoming a deeply conservative and evangelical Christian. This austere upbringing spurred Algernon the son to rebel, leading him towards mysticism and involvement with magic, such as the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which was an occult group, whose members included Bram Stoker, Arthur Mack and Aleister Crowley, MacGregor Mathers, a ton of people who were interested in the occult, really, and Western ritual magic. So he was a big traveller, so he spent a lot of time in Canada and the USA, and he worked on a whole bunch of jobs, from dairy farming to bartending. Was he actually? I think he was a logger as well. Anyway, his experience in Canada leads to such stories as The Wendigo, and I guess I'm not sure about his time on the Danube, but certainly The Willows is set there. So he was an extensive traveller, He came back to England in 1899 at the age of 30 and began to be a writer. His first collection of short stories was published in 1906. And what we've got is he writes three kinds of stories, really. Ghost stories like this, and as a subtext on that really is his I'm going to say something about this, possibly repeat myself, about the mundane, the everyday ordinary blokes. We did another story of his, The Empty House, which is very much like that. Ordinary people getting involved in the supernatural, so the supernatural and the very ordinary. And if you think about the descent of the high Gothic castles in foreign places with nobility and all sorts of stuff, very turned up, and we get to sort of Blackwood, one of the possibly the first people to really write your ordinary, which later become a hallmark of the 20th century and later end up in such movies as The Conjuring and stuff like that, where it's about ordinary suburban people. The Gothic had started off not being about ordinary situations. So he writes ghost stories, he writes weird fiction and strange stories. We'll talk a little bit about his cosmic horror type thing. So and if you listen to Descent into Egypt and The Man Whom the Trees Loved, which are both quite long stories, what you find is they're pretty philosophical and they're mystical, and they discuss or they bring out Blackwood's deeply felt spiritual life as well, and his understanding of the world as a spiritual place. I'm probably going to say something about this now rather than leave it. We have, if we think of Lovecraft, who is writing slightly later, but a big crossover with Blackwood, and we think of Arthur Machen, who's a generation, a couple of decades before, really, although they were all alive at the same time. And then we have Lovecraft's cosmic horror, which is about these huge, inhuman creatures, Cthulhu, Yog-Sothoth, and Nyarlathotep, to a lesser extent, because he's kind of humanized a bit, as Athoth and all of these represent. I think it's no surprise that Lovecraft was deeply interested in science fiction and science, because at that time what had happened had been that Western culture had unshackled itself to a large degree from its Christian foundation and taken on Enlightenment ideas and was preferring a scientific explanation of the universe rather than a religious explanation of the universe. And that led to this machine, what they call it, the blind watchmaker makes it, and it's a machine that just goes on and on forever, has no meaning, no purpose, just mechanistic. And if you take that, our significance as creatures, where we had been the favoured creatures of God, think about that, Adam and Eve. And then science comes along and Darwin comes and says, you're just another animal, really, you're just another kind of monkey. And then Freud comes along and says, your intellect, and you think this intellect is super duper duper. It's actually not. It's undermined by the unconscious, by these primal drives towards sexuality and all sorts. So, and science appeared to be dethroning humanity from its central place as in the universe. And so Lovecraft comes along and goes, do you know what, there's these huge titanic forces which are kind of like gods, and they don't care a hoot about you. They'll step on you like a bug. And that's kind of Lovecraft's horrific, our utter pointlessness, our existential, it's like an existential dread, isn't it? We are, and at the same time you have the French existentialists, Camus and Sartre and people like that. With this thing that we mean nothing. We are thrown meaningless. We wake meaningless. Heidegger as well, potentially, into this universe, and we are without purpose. And so that leads to this existential dread. Now, let's look at Blackwood's take on that, which is that he is not cosmic. He's not looking at the stars. His people move in natural landscapes, either in man whom the trees love, the willows, etc., or the wendigo, in these open, wild landscapes where there's this force, an elemental force that's neither good nor bad, but it doesn't care about us. It's nature, but it is alive, and it's at least partially sentient and at least partially purposeful. It has a purpose, and that's kind of like Blackwood's. I was thinking about Arthur Machen as well. He's like the Greco Pan, the white people, the Shining Pyramid. They live in this mystical world of unsettling creatures whose motives we have no knowledge of, and therefore we can't control, therefore we can't make safe. And that's another version of this existential dread, that we are weak and the prey of great powers who, unlike the Christian God, don't love us, these things. They don't care about us. They're not out to get us in many cases. They just don't care about us. So I think that's how Blackwood fits into this cosmic horror, existential dread type thing. But he, at least, like Machen, I suppose, allows for some transcendence of this, and that may be by assimilating ourselves or coming to understand or seeing our real place in the natural world. For for Blackwood, there may be some kind of succor there, some help there. Anyway, I was saying about his biography. He was a guy. Anyway, I've got not to do is refer to people who write nasty things. So I'm not going to talk about that. So Blackwood, he then got involved in the TV, and he read a ghost story on the BBC's first ever television programme broadcast from Alexandra Palace in 1936. Yeah, 2nd November 1936. His sonorous voice and compelling delivery on both radio and television earned him the moniker the Ghost Man. And he was still writing until his death in 1982. Let's look at this particular story, Transition. It's a short story published in December 1913, clearly a Christmas ghost story, in The New Witness, a weekly journal edited by Cecil Chesterton. It was later reprinted in his own collection, 10-minute stories, the next year in 1914, published by John Murray. And there were 50 short stories, each designed to be read in approximately 10 minutes. So he does write very long stories as well. Mostly his stories are really long. So Transition, it's the mundane, it's just an ordinary Joe. You see this, we did a story called The Underground by Chetwynd Hayes, and that also is about ordinary people. And I think that's its strength, that he's not very special. He's bought cheap presents, presumably because that's all he can afford. He's not doing particularly well in the world, and yet he's not an unsympathetic character. He is perhaps, I'm going to get gunned down here, but he is perhaps characteristic of that stage in a relationship where you've been with somebody for a long time, and that kind of passionate stuff has waned a little, but you have a deep love for them still, and you care for them, and that, he says, the romance has maybe died, but he clearly deeply cares for his wife, and has brought these things with no other aim than to please. There's no side to him, there's no manoeuvring. He just wants to make her happy, and the same for the kids, and how much he loves his 3 kids. So this is every man, and in a sense, I want to say, and maybe stretching beyond the text here, but it seems to me to be a celebration of the ordinary man or woman who's living an ordinary life, who does it with good heart, does their job sincerely well. They're not super duper top of the pie, whatever, crust. They're not, but they're just a minor person in a bank in this case. but they are still valuable and worthwhile. And I think that is certainly one message of this story, that the ordinary life of an everyday person who is nothing special, is still really valuable because it's embedded in a network of love and care for people. And I think we saw this coming really, that it was actually dead, because we've seen The Sixth Sense, so we know, and we've read Russell Kirk's Saviour Gate, and if you haven't, go and listen to it now on the channel. It's a good Christmas ghost story. So yes. So ghost stories, Christmas ghost stories. You can tell I've lost my thread. Hang on a second. Yes. What I was saying is, even those who are dead are very genial and affable. And basically their message is, life's over in a flash. Don't worry, they'll be with us soon, and then we'll continue with our party. Because everybody's really happy in the afterlife. And I think this reflects Blackwood's faith in a spiritual dimension to life. So, is that all I want to say about it? Let me just see if there's any. I made extensive notes, but I haven't used them all. The tension, we saw it coming. I think the problem is we've read too many books, seen too many plays, I think that's a Lou Reed quote. And we know what's going to come. We know he did that. But the Crowd by Ray Bradbury's a little bit like that as well. There's another thing, urban alienation. Blackwood was really interested in urban alienation. This is a man who loves the natural world, who believes in the power of the natural world. And clearly he's probably not going to like the mundanity of ordinary urban life. So, fair enough. But I didn't think that was a massively strong one. The only other thing I want to link it to, as I often do, is Mark Fisher's. You probably realise there are a couple of people who were a massive influence on me and my thinking. Certainly one's Carl Jung, the other is Mark Fisher. I wonder how they would have got on. So Mark Fisher sadly ended his life in 2017. I think as time goes on, people will realise what a genius he was, what a sharp thinker he was. But certainly he talks about, in his book The Weird and Eerie, he talks about things that unsettle us, and one of them is the eerie. And the eerie is about an agent. So somebody or something has a purpose. And if we know what that purpose is, and we can predict what they're going to do, and we can manage how we get on with them and ensure that we don't get gobbled up or squashed, then that feels a bit safe. That's not eerie. But where the purpose is unknown, that creates this eeriness. What on earth is this all about? And that creates great anxiety, because we don't know. There's an agent out there that has purpose, and we don't know what it wants. And it seems very powerful, and oh goodness, that's scary. Yeah, and I think that's another flip side of. It's perhaps closer to the fear found in cosmic horror than, in fact, I said existentialist dread, which I think it arises from our meaninglessness. So let's think about that. I'm not like this, but for many people in the 20th and 21st century, I think they are. They feel purposeless and meaningless, and they wake up in a world they have no idea what's going on, what they're doing here, what they're supposed to do, or what the end will be, other than it won't be, it'll end up with them leaving the world. And they have no conception of how or when that'll happen. For most of us, for most of our lives, we don't. And so that meaninglessness is awful, and that is to do with our scientific worldview and the fact we've removed the spiritual. This is my view, the spiritual from. So if we have a world that is just a machine made of bits that go on for no reason, that doesn't make people happy. Most of us don't like that. We feel really unpleasantly unhappy and drained from that. So that's our existential dread. And then if we look around, the world is meaningless. But goodness me, these things seem to happen. We have viruses, we have floods, we have earthquakes. There are comets that might strike, or meteors that might strike the Earth. There are lots of drones flying around, and nobody knows somebody does. who's piloting them, but I quite like that. That's like the Killer Clowns. I love those as well. But you know, and because that's eerie, isn't it? The drones are eerie. What do they want? There is a purpose. They appear to be purposeful, but what do they want? Anyway, I hope I haven't gone on too much. But I think this idea of the eerie and of our, if you take that view of our meaninglessness, which I don't, and I don't think Blackwood did either. The Blackwood clearly didn't. Not in this song, not in this story. It's a very hopeful story, I think. But if you put them together, you get the eerie. I think the eerie, Macklish's understanding of the eerie is really a key to turning it off. Anyway, that's it. Another Christmas story, a short one. I've blethered longer than the story. Somebody will comment on that. Honestly, they will. And I say to you, feel the quality, never mind the width. You know, never mind the quality, feel the width. That's what they used to say, isn't it? But feel the quality. It's a sweet little story, and I've enjoyed it. And if you're hungry for more stories, remember I've just put out a massive 12-hour plus compilation of 22 ghost stories for Christmas. So if you are not yet satisfied, and you've gone no, and you're stamping your little feet and you're banging your little fist on the table, I want more stories. Guess what? I've got them for you. 22 Christmas ghost stories, 12 hours of it. I've got lots of long compilations for you just to doze off to. That is your wont. Anyway, I think I've got one more before Christmas. I don't know what I'm going to do. I might do a Dickens. Probably should. Anyway, ta-ta. Horror, a True Tale by John Berwick Harwood. I was but 19 years of age when the incident occurred, which has thrown a shadow over my life. And, ah me, how many and many a weary year has dragged by since then. Young, happy and beloved I was in those long departed days. They said that I was beautiful. The mirror now reflects a haggard old woman with ashen lips and a face of deadly pallor. But do not fancy that you are listening to a mere puling lament. It is not the flight of years that has brought me to be this wreck of my former self. Had it been so, I could have borne the loss cheerfully, patiently, as the common lot of all. But it was no natural progress of decay which has robbed me of bloom, of youth, of the hopes and joys that belong to youth, snapped the link that bound my heart to another's, and doomed me to a lone old age. I try to be patient, but my cross has been heavy, and my heart is empty and weary, and I long for the death that comes so slowly to those who pray to die. I will try and relate exactly as it happened the event which blighted my life. Though it occurred many years ago, there is no fear that I should have forgotten any of the minutest circumstances. They were stamped on my brain too clearly and burningly, like the brand of a red-hot iron. I see them written in the wrinkles of my brow, in the dead whiteness of my hair, which was once a glossy brown, and has known no gradual change from dark to grey, from grey to white, as with those happy ones who are the companions of my girlhood, and whose honoured age is soothed by the love of children and grandchildren. But I must not envy them. I only meant to say that the difficulty of my task has no connection with want of memory. I remember but too well. But as I take the pen, my hand trembles, my head swims, the old rushing faintness and horror comes over me again, and the well-remembered fear is upon me. Yet, I will go on. This, briefly, is my story. I was a great heiress, I believe, though I cared little for the fact, but so it was. My father had great possessions and no son to inherit after him. His 3 daughters, of whom I was the youngest, were to share the broad acres among them. I have said, and truly, that I cared little for this circumstance, and indeed I was so rich then in health and youth and love that I felt myself quite indifferent to all else. The possession of all the treasures of earth could never have made up for what I then had, and lost, as I am about to relate. Of course, we girls knew that we were heiresses, but I do not think that Lucy and Minnie were any the prouder or the happier on the account. I know I was not. Reginald did not court me for my money. Of that I felt assured. He proved it, heaven be praised, when he shrank from my side after the change. Yes, in all my lonely age, I can still be thankful that he did not keep his word, as some would have done, did not clasp at the altar a hand he had learned to loathe and shudder at, because it was full of gold. Much gold. At least he spared me that, and I know that I was loved, and the knowledge has kept me from going mad through many a weary day and restless night, when my hot eyeballs had not a tear to shed, and even to weep was a luxury denied me. Our house was an old Tudor mansion. My father was very particular in keeping the smallest peculiarities of his home unaltered. Thus the many peaks and gables, the numerous turrets, and the mullioned windows with their quaint lozenge panes set in lead remained very nearly as they had been 3 centuries back. Over and above the quaint melancholy of our dwelling, and the deep woods of its park, and the sullen waters of the mere, our neighbourhood was thinly peopled and primitive, and the people round us were ignorant and tenacious of ancient ideas and traditions. Thus it was a superstitious atmosphere that we children were reared in, and we heard, from our infancy, countless tales of horror, some mere fables doubtless, others legends of dark deeds of the olden time, exaggerated by credulity and the love of the marvellous. Our mother had died when we were young, and our other parent being, though a kind father, much absorbed in affairs of various kinds as an active magistrate and landlord, there was no one to check the unwholesome stream of tradition with which our plastic minds were inundated in the company of nurses and servants. As years went on, however, the old ghostly tales partially lost their effects, and our undisciplined minds were turned more towards balls, dresses, and partners, and other matters airy and trivial, more welcome to our riper age. It was at a county assembly that Reginald and I first met and loved. Yes, I am sure that he loved me with all his heart. It was not as deep a heart as some, I thought in my grief and anger, but I never doubted its truth and honesty. Reginald's father and mine approved of our growing attachment, and as for myself, I know I was so happy then that I look back upon these fleeting moments as on some delicious dream. I now come to the change. I have lingered on my childish reminiscences, my bright and happy youth, and now I must tell the rest, the blight and the sorrow. It was Christmas, always a joyful and hospitable time in the country, especially in such an old hall as our home, where quaint customs and frolics were much clung to as part and parcel of the very dwelling itself. The hall was full of guests, so full indeed that there was a great difficulty in providing sleeping accommodation for all. Several narrow and dark chambers in the turrets, mere pigeonholes, as we irreverently called what had been thought good enough for the stately gentlemen of Elizabeth's reign, were now allotted to bachelor visitors, after being empty for a century. All the spare rooms in the body and wings of the hall were occupied, of course, and the servants who had been brought down were lodged at the farm and at the keeper's, so great was the demand for space. At last, the unexpected arrival of an elderly relative, who had been asked months before, but scarcely expected, caused great commotion. My aunts went about wringing their hands distractedly. Lady Speldhurst was a personage of some consequence. She was a distant cousin, and had been for years on cool terms with us all, on account of some fancied affront or slight when she had paid her last visit, about the time of my christening. She was 70 years old. She was infirm, rich, and testy. Moreover, she was my godmother, though I had forgotten the fact. But it seems that though I had formed no expectations of a legacy in my favour, my aunts had done so for me. Aunt Margaret was especially eloquent on the subject. "There isn't a room left," she said. "Was ever anything so unfortunate? We cannot put Lady Speldhurst into the turrets. And yet where is she to sleep? And Rosa's godmother too. Poor dear child, how dreadful! After all these years of estrangement, and with 100,000 in the funds, and no comfortable warm room at her own unlimited disposal, and Christmas, of all times in the year. What was to be done?" My aunts could not resign their own chambers to Lady Speldhurst, because they had already given them up to some of the married guests. My father was the most hospitable of men, but he was rheumatic, gouty, and methodical. His sisters-in-law dared not propose to shift his quarters, and indeed he would have far sooner dined on prison fare than have been translated to a strange bed. The matter ended in my giving up my room. I had a strange reluctance to making the offer, which surprised myself. Was it a boding of evil to come? I cannot say. We are strangely and wonderfully made. It may have been. At any rate, I do not think it was any selfish unwillingness to make an old and infirm lady comfortable by a trifling sacrifice. I was perfectly healthy and strong. The weather was not cold for the time of year. It was a dark, moist Yule, but not a snowy one, though snow brooded overhead in the darkling clouds. I did make the offer, which became me, I said with a laugh, as the youngest. My sisters laughed too, and made a jest of my evident wish to propitiate my godmother. "She is a fairy godmother, Rosa," said Minnie, "and you know she was affronted at your christening, and went away muttering vengeance. Here she's coming back to see you. I hope she brings golden gifts with her." I thought little of Lady Speldhurst and of possible golden gifts. I cared nothing for the wonderful fortune in the funds that my aunts whispered and nodded about so mysteriously. But since then, I have wondered whether, had I then shown myself peevish or obstinate, had I refused to give up my room for the expected kinswoman, it would not have altered the whole of my life. But then Lucy and Minnie would have offered in my stead, and been sacrificed. What do I say? Better that the blow should have fallen as it did, than on those dear ones. The chamber to which I removed was a dim little triangular room in the western wing, and was only to be reached by traversing the picture gallery, or by mounting a little flight of stone stairs which led directly upwards from the low-browed arch of a door that opened into the garden. There was one more room on the same landing place, and this was a mere receptacle for broken furniture, shattered toys, and all the lumber that will accumulate in the country house. The room I was to inhabit for a few nights was a tapestry-hung apartment with faded green curtains of some costly stuff, contrasting oddly with a new carpet and the bright fresh hangings of the bed, which had been hurriedly erected. The furniture was half old, half new, and on the dressing table stood a very quaint oval mirror in a frame of black wood, unpolished ebony, I think. I can remember the very pattern of the carpet, the number of chairs, the situation of the bed, the figures on the tapestry. Nay, I can recollect not only the colour of the dress I wore on that fatal evening, but the arrangement of every scrap of lace and ribbon, of every flower, every jewel, with a memory but too perfect. Scarcely had my maid finished spreading out my various articles of attire for the evening, when there was to be a great dinner party, when the rumble of a carriage announced that Lady Speldhurst had arrived. The short winter's day drew to a close, and a large number of guests were gathered together in the ample drawing-room around the blaze of the wood fire after dinner. My father, I recollect, was not with us at first. There were some squires of the old hard-riding, hard-drinking stamp still lingering over their port in the dining-room, and the host, of course, couldn't leave them. But the ladies and all the younger gentlemen, both those who slept under our roof and those who would have a dozen miles of fog and mire to encounter on their road home, were all together. Need I say that Reginald was there? He sat near me, my accepted lover, my plighted future husband. We were to be married in the spring. My sisters were not far off. They too had found eyes that sparkled and softened in meeting theirs, had found hearts that beat responsive to their own, and in their cases no rude frost nipped the blossom ere it became the fruit. There was no canker in the flowerets of young hope, no cloud in their sky. Innocent and loving, they were beloved by men worthy of their esteem. The room, a large and lofty one with an arched roof, had somewhat of a sombre character from being wainscoted and sealed with polished black oak of a great age. There were mirrors, and there were pictures on the walls, and handsome furniture, and marble chimney pieces, and a gay two-may carpet. But these merely appeared as bright spots on the dark background of the Elizabethan woodwork. Many lights were burning, but the blackness of the walls and roof seemed absolutely to swallow up their rays, like the mouth of a cavern. 100 candles could not have given that apartment the cheerful lightness of a modern drawing room. But the gloomy richness of the panels matched well with the ruddy gleam from the enormous wood fire, in which, crackling and glowing, now lay the mighty Yule log. Quite a blood-red lustre poured forth from the fire, and quivered on the walls and the groined roof. We had gathered round the vast antique hearth in a wide circle. The quivering light of the fire and candles fell upon us all, but not equally, for some were in shadow. I remember still how tall and manly and handsome Reginald looked that night, taller by the head than any there, and full of high spirits and gaiety. I too was in the highest spirits. Never had my bosom felt lighter, and I believe it was my mirth which gradually gained the rest, for I recollect what a blithe, joyous company we seemed, all save one. Lady Speldhurst, dressed in grey silk and wearing a quaint headdress, sat in her armchair facing the fire, very silent, with her hands and her sharp chin propped on a sort of ivory-handled crutch that she walked with, for she was lame, peering at me with half-shut eyes. She was a little spare old woman, with very keen, delicate features of the French type. The grey silk dress, the spotless lace, old-fashioned jewels, and prim neatness of array were well suited to the intelligence of her face, with its thin lips and eyes of a piercing black, undimmed by age. Those eyes made me uncomfortable, in spite of my gaiety, as they followed my every movement with curious scrutiny. Still, I was very merry and gay. My sisters even wondered at my ever-ready mirth, which was almost wild in its excess. I have heard since then of the Scottish belief that those doomed to some great calamity become fey, and are never so disposed for merriment and laughter as just below the blow falls. If ever mortal was fey, then I was so on that evening. Still, though I strove to shake it off, the pertinacious observation of old Lady Speldhurst's eyes did make an impression on me of a vaguely disagreeable nature. Others too noticed her scrutiny of me, but set it down as a mere eccentricity of a person always reputed whimsical, to say the least of it. However, this disagreeable sensation lasted but a few minutes. After a short pause, my aunt took her part in the conversation, and we found ourselves listening to a weird legend which the old lady told exceedingly well. One tale led to another. Everyone was called on in turn to contribute to the public entertainment, and story after story, always relating to demonology and witchcraft, succeeded. It was Christmas, the season for such tales, and the old room, with its dusky walls and pictures, and vaulted roof, drinking up the light so greedily, seemed just fitted to give effect to such legendary lore. The huge logs crackled and burnt with glowing warmth, The blood-red glare of the Yule log flashed on the faces of the listeners and the narrator, on the portraits, and the holly wreathed around their frames, and the upright old dame in her antiquated dress and trinkets, like one of the originals of the pictures, stepped from the canvas to join our circle. It threw a shimmering lustre of an ominously ruddy hue upon the oaken panels. No wonder that the ghost and goblin stories had a new zest. No wonder that the blood of the more timid grew chill and curdled, that their flesh crept and their hearts beat irregularly. And the girls peeped fearfully over their shoulders and huddled close together like frightened sheep, and half fancied they beheld some impish and malignant face gibbering at them from behind the darkling corners of the old room. By degrees my high spirits died out, and I felt the childish tremors long latent, long forgotten, coming over me. I followed each story with painful interest. I did not ask myself if I believed the dismal tales. I listened, and fear grew upon me, the blind, irrational fear of our nursery days. I am sure most of the other ladies present, young or middle-aged, were affected by the circumstances under which these traditions were heard, no less than by the wild, fantastic character of them. But with them, the impression would die out next morning, when the bright sun should shine on the frosted boughs, and the rime on the grass, and the scarlet berries and green spikelets of the holly. And with me, but what was to happen ere another day dawned? Before we had made an end of this talk, my father and the other squires came in, and we ceased our ghost stories, ashamed to speak of such matters before these newcomers, hard-headed, unimaginative men who had no sympathy with idle legends. There was now a stir and a bustle. Servants were handing round tea and coffee and other refreshments. Then there was a little music and singing. I sang a duet with Reginald, who had a fine voice and good musical skill. I remember that my singing was much praised, and indeed I was surprised at the power and pathos of my own voice, doubtless due to my excited nerves and mind. Then I heard someone say to another that I was by far the cleverest of the squire's daughters, as well as the prettiest. It did not make me vain. I had no rivalry with Lucy and Minnie, but Reginald whispered some soft, fond words in my ear, a little before he mounted his horse to set off homewards, which did make me happy and proud, and to think that the next time we met. But I forgave him long ago. Poor Reginald. And now shawls and cloaks were in request, and carriages rolled up to the porch, and the guests gradually departed. At last no one was left but those visitors staying in the house. Then my father, who had been called out to speak with the bailiff of the estate, came back with a look of annoyance on his face. "Strange story I've just been told," said he. "Here's been my bailiff to inform me of the loss of 4 of the choicest ewes out of that little flock of Southdowns I set such store by, and which arrived in the north but 2 months since. And the poor creatures have been destroyed in so strange a manner, for their carcasses are horribly mangled." Most of us uttered some expression of pity or surprise, and some suggested that a vicious dog was probably the culprit. "It would seem so," said my father. "It certainly seems the work of a dog, and yet all the men agree that no dog of such habits exists near us, where indeed dogs are scarce, excepting the shepherd's collies and the sporting dogs secured in yards. Yet the sheep are gnawed and bitten, for they show the marks of teeth. Something has done this and has torn their bodies wolfishly, but apparently it has been only to suck the blood, for little or no flesh is gone." "How strange!" cried several voices. Then some of the gentlemen remembered to have heard cases when dogs addicted to sheep-killing had destroyed whole flocks, as if in sheer wantonness, scarcely deigning to taste a morsel of each slain wether. My father shook his head. "I've heard of such cases too," he said, "but in this instance I'm tempted to think the malice of some unknown enemy has been at work. The teeth of a dog have been busy, no doubt, but the poor sheep have been mutilated in a fantastic manner, as strange as horrible. Their hearts in especial have been torn out, and left at some paces off half gnawed, Also, the men persist that they found the print of a naked human foot in the soft mud of the ditch, and near it, this. And he held up what seemed a broken link of a rusted iron chain. Many were the ejaculations of wonder and alarm, and many and shrewd the conjectures, but none seemed exactly to suit the bearings of the case. And when my father went on to say that 2 lambs of the same valuable breed had perished in the same singular manner 3 days previously, and that they also were found mangled and gore-stained, the amazement reached a higher pitch. Old Lady Speldhurst listened with calm, intelligent attention, and joined in none of our exclamations. At length she said to my father, "Try and recollect, have you no enemy among your neighbours?" My father started and knit his brows. "Not one that I know of," he replied, and indeed he was a popular man and a kind landlord. "The more lucky you," said the old dame with one of her grim smiles. It was now late, and we retired to rest before long. One by one the guests dropped off. I was the member of the family selected to escort old Lady Speldhurst to her room, the room I had vacated in her favour. I did not much like the office. I felt a remarkable repugnance to my godmother, but my worthy aunts insisted so much that I should ingratiate myself with one who had so much to leave that I could not but comply. The visitor hobbled up the broad oaken stairs actively enough, propped on my arm and her ivory crutch. The room never had looked more genial and pretty, with its brisk fire, modern furniture, and the gay French paper on the walls. "A nice room, my dear, and I ought to be much obliged to you for it, since my maid tells me it is yours," said her ladyship. "But I am pretty sure you repent your generosity to me, after all those ghost stories, and tremble to think of a strange bed and chamber, eh?" I made some commonplace reply. The old lady arched her eyebrows. "Where have they put you, child?" she asked. "In some cock loft of the turrets, eh? Or in a lumber room? A regular ghost trap. I can hear your heart beating with fear this moment. You're not fit to be alone." I tried to call up my pride and laugh off the accusations against my courage, all the more perhaps because I felt its truth. "Do you want anything more that I can get you, Lady Speldhurst?" I asked, trying to feign a yawn of sleepiness. The old dame's keen eyes were upon me. "I rather like you, my dear," she said, "and I liked your mamma well enough before she treated me so shamefully at the christening dinner. Now, I know you are frightened and fearful, and if an owl should but flap your window tonight, it might drive you into fits. There's a nice little sofa bed in this dressing closet. Call your maid to arrange it for you, and you can sleep there snugly under the old witch's protection, and then no goblin dare harm you, and nobody will be a bit the wiser or quiz you for being afraid." How little I knew what hung in the balance of my refusal or acceptance. That trivial proffer, had the veil of the future been lifted for one instant. But that veil is impenetrable to our gaze. Yet perhaps she had a glimpse of the dim vista beyond, she who made the offer. For when I declined with an affected laugh, she said in a thoughtful, half-abstracted manner, "Well, well, we must all take our own way through life. Good night, child. Pleasant dreams." And I softly closed the door. As I did so, she looked round at me rapidly, with a glance I have never forgotten, half malicious, half sad, as if she had divined the yawning gulf that was to devour my young hopes. It may have been mere eccentricity, the odd fantasy of a crooked mind, the whimsical conduct of a cynical person, triumphant in the power of affrighting youth and beauty. Or, I have since thought, it may have been that this singular guest possessed some such gift as the Highland second sight, a gift vague, sad, and useless to the possessor, but still sufficient to convey a dim sense of coming evil and boding doom. And yet, Had she really known what was in store for me? What lurked behind the veil of the future? Not even that arid heart could have remained impassive to the cry of humanity. She must have snatched me back, even from the edge of the black pit of misery. But doubtless she had not the power. Doubtless she had but a shadowy presentiment, at any rate, of some harm to happen, and could not see, save darkly, into the viewless void, where the wisest stumble. I left her door. As I crossed the landing, a bright gleam came from another room whose door was left ajar. The light, fell like a bar of golden sheen across my path. As I approached, the door opened and my sister Lucy, who had been watching for me, came out. She was already in a white cashmere wrapper, over which her loosened hair hung darkly and heavily like tangles of silk. "Rosa, love," she whispered, "Minnie and I can't bear the idea of your sleeping out there all alone in that solitary room. The very room, too, Nurse Sherrard used to talk about. So, as you know, Minnie has given up her room and come to sleep in mine. Still, we should so wish you to stop with us tonight at any rate, and I could make up a bed on the sofa for myself or you, and—" I stopped Lucy's mouth with a kiss. I declined her offer. I would not listen to it. In fact, my pride was up in arms, and I felt I would rather pass the night in the churchyard itself than accept a proposal dictated, I felt sure, by the notion that my nerves were shaken by the ghostly lore we had been raking up, that I was a weak, superstitious creature, unable to pass a night in a strange chamber. So I wouldn't listen to Lucy, but kissed her, bade her good night, and went on my way laughing to show my light heart. Yet, as I looked back in that dark corridor and saw the friendly door still ajar, the yellow bar of light still crossing from wall to wall, the sweet, kind face still peering after me from amid its clustering curls, I felt a thrill of sympathy, a wish to return, a yearning after human love and companionship. False shame was strongest and conquered. I waved a gay adieu. I turned the corner, and peeping over my shoulder, I saw the door close. The bar of yellow light was there no longer in the darkness of the passage. I thought at that instant that I heard a heavy sigh. I looked sharply round. No one was there. No door was open, yet I fancied with a wonderful vividness that I did hear an actual sigh breathed not far off, and plainly distinguishable from the groan of the sycamore branches as the wind tossed them to and fro in the outer blackness. If ever a mortal's good angel had cause to sigh for sorrow, not sin, mine had cause to mourn that night. But imagination plays us strange tricks, and my nervous system was not overcomposed or very fitted for judicial analysis. I had to go through the picture gallery. I had never entered this apartment by candlelight before, and I was struck by the gloomy array of the tall portraits, gazing moodily from the canvas on the lozenge-paned or painted windows, which rattled to the blast as it swept howling by. Many of the faces looked stern, and very different from their daylight expression. In others, a furtive, flickering smile seemed to mock me as my candle illuminated them. And in all, the eyes, as usual with artistic portraits, seemed to follow my motions with a scrutiny and an interest the more marked for the apathetic immovability of the other features. I felt ill at ease under this stony gaze, though conscious how absurd were my apprehensions, and I called up a smile and an air of mirth, more as if acting a part under the eyes of human beings than of their mere shadows on the wall. I even laughed as I confronted them. No echo had my short-lived laughter, but from the hollow armour and arching roof, and I continued on my way in silence. I have spoken of the armour. Indeed, there was a fine collection of plate and mail, for my father was an enthusiastic antiquary. In especial, there were 2 suits of black armour, erect and surmounted by helmets with closed visors, which stood as if 2 mailed champions were guarding the gallery and its treasures. I had often seen these, of course, but never by night, and never when my whole organization was so overwrought and tremulous as it then was. As I approached the Black Knights, as we had dubbed them, a wild notion seized on me that the figures moved, that men were concealed in the hollow shells which had once been born in battle and tourney. I knew the idea was childish, yet I approached in irrational alarm, and fancied I absolutely beheld eyes glaring on me from the eyelet holes in the visors. I passed them by, and then my excited fancy told me that the figures were following me with stealthy strides. I heard a clatter of steel, caused, I'm sure, by some more violent gust of wind, sweeping the gallery through the crevices of the old windows, and with a smothered shriek I rushed to the door, opened it, darted out, and clapped it to with a bang that re-echoed through the whole wing of the house. Then, by a sudden and not uncommon revulsion of feeling, I shook off my aimless terrors, blushed at my weakness, and sought my chamber only too glad I had been the only witness of my late tremors. As I entered my chamber, I thought I heard something stir in the neglected lumber room, which was the only neighbouring apartment. But I was determined to have no more panics, and resolutely shut my ears to this slight and transient noise, which had nothing unnatural in it. For surely, between rats and wind, an old manor house on a stormy night needs no sprites to disturb it. So I entered my room and rang for my maid. As I did so, I looked around me, and a most unaccountable repugnance to my temporary abode came over me, in spite of my efforts. It was no more to be shaken off than the chill is to be shaken off when we enter some damp cave, and rely upon it. The feeling of dislike and apprehension with which we regard at first sight certain places and people was not implanted in us without some wholesome purpose. I grant it is irrational, mere animal instinct. But is not instinct God's gift, and is it for us to despise it? It is by instinct that children know their friends from their enemies, that they distinguish with such unerring accuracy between those who like them and those who only flatter and hate them. Dogs do the same. They will fawn on one person, they slink snarling from another. Show me a man whom children and dogs shrink from, and I will show you a false, bad man, lies on his lips, and murder at his heart. No, let none despise the heaven-sent gift of innate antipathy, which makes the horse quail when the lion crouches in the thicket, which makes the cattle scent the shambles from afar, and low in terror and disgust as their nostrils snuff the blood-polluted air. I felt this antipathy strongly as I looked around me in my new sleeping room, and yet I could find no reasonable pretext for my dislike. A very good room it was, after all, now that the green damask curtains were drawn, the fire burning bright and clear, candles burning on the mantelpiece, and the various familiar articles of toilet arranged as usual. The bed, too, looked peaceful and inviting, a pretty little white bed, not at all the gaunt funereal sort of couch which haunted apartments generally contain. My maid entered, and assisted me to lay aside the dress and ornaments I'd worn, and arranged my hair as usual, prattling the while in Abigail fashion. I seldom cared to converse with servants, but on that night a sort of dread of being left alone, a longing to keep some human being near me, possessed me. I encouraged the girl to gossip, so that her duties took her half an hour longer to get through than usual. At last, however, she had done all that could be done, and all my questions were answered, and my orders for the morrow reiterated and vowed obedience to, and the clock on the turret struck 1. Then Mary, yawning a little, asked if I wanted anything more, and I was obliged to answer no, for very shame's sake. And she went. The shutting of the door, gently as it was closed, affected me unpleasantly. I took a dislike to the curtains, the tapestry, dingy pictures, everything. I hated the room. I felt a temptation to put on a cloak, run half-dressed to my sister's chamber, and say I'd changed my mind and come for shelter. But they must be asleep, I thought, and I couldn't be so unkind as to wake them. I said my prayers with unusual earnestness and a heavy heart. I extinguished the candles, and was just about to lay my head on my pillow, when the idea seized me that I would fasten the door. The candles were extinguished, but the firelight was amply sufficient to guide me. I gained the door. There was a lock, but it was rusty or hampered. My utmost strength could not turn the key. The bolt was broken and worthless. Balked of my intention, I consoled myself by remembering that I had never had need of fastenings yet, and returned to my bed. I lay awake for a good while, watching the red glow of the burning coals in the grate. I was quiet now and more composed. Even the light gossip of the maid, full of petty human cares and joys, had done me good, diverting my thoughts from brooding. I was on the point of dropping asleep when I was twice disturbed. Once by an owl hooting in the ivy outside. No unaccustomed sound, but harsh and melancholy. Once by a long and mournful howling set up by the mastiff chained in the yard beyond the wing I occupied. A long-drawn, lugubrious howling was this latter, and much such a note as the vulgar declare to herald a death in the family. This was a fancy that I never shared, but yet I could not help feeling that the dog's mournful moans were sad and expressive of terror, not at all like his fierce, honest bark of anger, but rather as if something evil and unwonted were abroad. But soon I fell asleep. How long I slept, I never knew. I woke at once, with that abrupt start which we all know well, and which carries us in a second from utter unconsciousness to the full use of our faculties. The fire was still burning, but it was very low, and half the room or more was in deep shadow. I knew, I felt, that some person or thing was in the room, although nothing unusual was to be seen by the feeble light. Yet it was a sense of danger that had aroused me from slumber. I experienced, while yet asleep, the chill and shock of sudden alarm. And I knew, even in the act of throwing off sleep like a mantle, why I awoke, and that some intruder was present. Yet, though I listened intently, no sound was audible except the faint murmur of the fire, the dropping of a cinder from the bars, the loud, irregular beatings of my own heart. Notwithstanding this silence, by some intuition, I knew that I had not been deceived by a dream, and felt certain that I was not alone. I waited. My heart beat on quicker. More sudden grew its pulsations, as a bird in a cage might flutter, the crests of a hawk. And then I heard a sound, faint but distinct, the clank of iron, the rattling of a chain. I ventured to lift my head from the pillow. Dim and uncertain as the light was, I saw the curtains of my bed shake, and caught a glimpse of something beyond, a darker spot in the darkness. This confirmation of my fears did not surprise me so much as it shocked me. I strove to cry aloud, but could not utter a word. The chain rattled again, and this time the noise was louder and clearer. But though I strained my eyes, they could not penetrate the obscurity that shrouded the other end of the chamber, whence came the sullen clanking. In a moment, several distinct trains of thought, like many-coloured strands of thread twining into one, became palpable to my mental vision. Was it a robber? Could it be a supernatural visitant? Or was I the victim of a cruel trick, such as I had heard of, and which some thoughtless persons love to practice on the timid, reckless of its dangerous results? And then a new idea, with some ray of comfort in it, suggested itself. There was a fine young dog of the Newfoundland breed, a favourite of my father's, which was usually chained by night in an outhouse. Neptune might have broken loose, found his way to my room, and finding the door imperfectly closed, have pushed it open and entered. I breathed more freely as this harmless interpretation of the noise forced itself upon me. It must be the dog. But I was distressing myself uselessly. I resolved to call him. I strove to utter his name. Neptune! Neptune! But a secret apprehension restrained me, and I was mute. Then the chain clanked nearer and nearer to the bed. I saw a dusky, shapeless mass appear between the curtains on the opposite side to where I was lying. How I longed to hear the whine of the poor animal that I hoped might be the cause of my alarm. But no, I heard no sound, save the rustle of the curtains and the clash of the iron chain. Just then, the dying flame of the fire leaped up, and with one sweeping, hurried glance, I saw that the door was shut, and horror! It is not the dog. It is the semblance of a human form that now throws itself heavily on the bed outside the clothes and lies there, huge and swart in the red gleam. It treacherously dies away after showing so much to affright and sinks into dull darkness. There was now no light left, though the red cinders yet glowed with a ruddy gleam like the eyes of wild beasts. The chain rattled no more. I tried to speak, to scream wildly for help. My mouth was parched, my tongue refused to obey. I could not utter a cry, and indeed, who could have heard me? Alone as I was in that solitary chamber, with no living neighbour, and the picture gallery between me and any aid that even the loudest, most piercing shriek could summon, and the storm that howled without would have drowned my voice even if help had been at hand. To call aloud, to demand who was there, alas, how useless, how perilous. If the intruder were a robber, my outcries would but goad him to fury. But what robber would act thus? As for a trick, that seemed impossible. And yet, what lay by my side, now wholly unseen? I strove to pray aloud as there rushed on my memory a flood of weird legends, the dreaded yet fascinating lore of my childhood. I had heard and read of the spirits of wicked men forced to revisit the scenes of their earthly crimes, of demons that lurked in certain accursed spots, of the ghoul and vampire of the East. Stealing amid the graves they rifled for their ghostly banquets, and I shuddered as I gazed on the blank darkness where I knew it lay. It stirred, it moaned hoarsely, and again I heard the chain clank close beside me, so close that it must almost have touched me. I drew myself from it, shrinking away in loathing and terror of the evil thing. What I knew not, but felt that something malignant was near. And yet, in the extremity of my fear, I dared not speak. I was strangely cautious to be silent, even in moving farther off, for I had a wild hope that it, the phantom, the creature, whichever it was, had not discovered my presence in the room. And then I remembered all the events of the night. Lady Speldhurst's ill-omened vaticinations, her half-warnings, her singular look as we parted, my sister's persuasion, my terror in the gallery, the remark that this was the room Nurse Sherard used to talk of. And then memory, stimulated by fear, recalled the long-forgotten past, the ill repute of this disused chamber, the sins it had witnessed, the blood spilled, the poison administered by unnatural hate within its walls, the tradition which called it haunted. The green room, I remembered how fearfully the servants avoided it, how it was mentioned rarely and in whispers when we were children, and how we had regarded it as a mysterious region, unfit for mortal habitation. Was it, the dark form with the chain, a creature of this world, or a spectre? And again, more dreadful still, could it be that the corpses of wicked men were forced to rise and haunt in the body the places where they had wrought their evil deeds? And was such as these my grisly neighbour? The chain faintly rattled. My hair bristled, my eyeballs seemed starting from their sockets. The damps of a great anguish were upon my brow. My heart laboured as if I were crushed beneath some vast weight. Sometimes it appeared to stop its frenzied beatings. Sometimes its pulsations were fierce and hurried. My breath came short and with extreme difficulty, and I shivered as if with cold. Yet I feared to stir. It moved. It moaned. Its fetters clanked dismally. The couch creaked and shook. This was no phantom then, no air-drawn spectre, but its very solidity, its palpable presence, were 1,000 times more terrible. I felt that I was in the very grasp of what could not only affright, but harm, of something whose contact sickened the soul with deathly fear. I made a desperate resolve. I glided from the bed. I seized a warm wrapper, threw it around me, and tried to grope with extended hands my way to the door. My heart beat high at the hope of escape. But I had scarcely taken one step before the moaning was renewed. It changed into a threatening growl that would have suited a wolf's throat, and a hand clutched at my sleeve. I stood motionless. The muttering growl sank to a moan again. The chain sounded no more, but still the hand held its grip of my garment, and I feared to move. It knew of my presence then. My brain reeled, the blood boiled in my ears, and my knees lost all strength, while my heart panted like that of a deer in the wolf's jaws. I sank back, and the benumbing influence of excessive terror reduced me to a state of stupor. When my full consciousness returned, I was sitting on the edge of the bed, shivering with cold and barefooted. All was silent, but I felt that my sleeve was still clutched by my unearthly visitant. The silence lasted a long time. Then followed a chuckling laugh that froze my very marrow, and the gnashing of teeth as in demoniac frenzy, and then a wailing moan, and this was succeeded by silence. Hours may have passed, nay, though the tumult of my own heart prevented my hearing the clock strike, must have passed, but they seemed ages to me. And how were they spent? Hideous visions passed before the aching eyes that I dare not close, but which gazed ever into the dumb darkness where it lay, my dread companion through the watches of the night. I pictured it in every abhorrent form which an excited fancy could summon up, now as a skeleton with hollow eye holes and grinning fleshless jaws, now as a vampire with livid face and bloated form and dripping mouth wet with blood. Would it never be light? And yet when day should dawn, I should be forced to see it, face to face. I had heard that spectre and fiend were compelled to fade as morning brightened, but this creature was too real, too foul a thing of earth to vanish at cockcrow. No, I should see it, the horror, face to face. And then the cold prevailed, and my teeth chattered, and shiverings ran through me, and yet there was the damp of agony on my bursting brow. Some instinct made me snatch at a shawl or cloak that lay on a chair within reach, and wrap it around me. The moan was renewed, and the chain just stirred. Then I sank into apathy, like an Indian at the stake in the intervals of torture. Hours fled by, and I remained like a statue of ice, rigid and mute. I even slept, for I remember that I started to find the cold grey light of an early winter's day was on my face, and stealing around the room from between the heavy curtains of the window, shuddering, but urged by the impulse that rivets the gaze of the bird upon the snake, I turned to see the horror of the night. Yes, it was no fevered dream, no hallucination of sickness, no airy phantom unable to face the dawn. In the sickly light I saw it lying on the bed, with its grim head upon the pillow. A man, or a corpse arisen from its unhallowed grave and awaiting the demon that animated it? There it lay, a gaunt, gigantic form, wasted to a skeleton, half-clad, foul with dust and clotted gore, its huge limbs flung upon the couch as if at random, its shaggy hair streaming over the pillows like a lion's mane. Its face was towards me. Oh, the wild hideousness of that face, even in sleep. In features it was human, even through its horrid mask of mud and half-dried bloody gouts. But the expression was brutish and savagely fierce. The white teeth were visible between the parted lips in a malignant grin. The tangled hair and beard were mixed in leonine confusion, and there were scars disfiguring that brow. Round the creature's waist was a ring of iron, to which was attached a heavy but broken chain. The chain I had heard clanking. With a second glance I noted that part of the chain was wrapped in straw to prevent its galling the wearer. The creature, I cannot call it a man, had the marks of fetters on its wrists. The bony arm that protruded through one tattered sleeve was scarred and bruised. The feet were bare and lacerated by pebbles and briars, and one of them was wounded and wrapped in a morsel of rag. And the lean hands, one of which held my sleeve, were armed with talons like an eagle's. In an instant the horrid truth flashed upon me. I was in the grasp of a madman. Better the phantom that scares the sight than the wild beast that rends and tears the quivering flesh, the pitiless human brute that has no heart to be softened, no reason at whose bar to plead, no compassion, naught of man save the form and the cunning. I gasped in terror. Ah, the mystery of those ensanguined fingers, those gory wolfish jaws, that face, all besmeared with blackening blood, is revealed. The slain sheep, so mangled and rent, the fantastic butchery, the print of the naked foot, all were explained. And the chain, the broken link of which was found near the slaughtered animals, it came from his broken chain, the chain he had snapped, doubtless, in his escape from the asylum where his raging frenzy had been fettered and bound. In vain, ah me, how had this grisly Samson broken manacles and prison bars? How had he eluded guardian and keeper and a hostile world, and come hither on his wild way, hunted like a beast of prey, and snatching his hideous banquet like a beast of prey too? Yes, through the tatters of his mean and ragged garb, I could see the marks of the severities, cruel and foolish, with which men at that time tried to tame the might of madness. The scourge, its marks were there, and the scars of the hard iron fetters, and many a cicatrice and welt that told a dismal tale of harsh usage. But now he was loose, free to play the brute, the baited, tortured brute that they had made him, now without the cage, and ready to gloat over the victims his strength should overpower. Horror, horror, I was the prey, the victim, already in the tiger's clutch. And a deadly sickness came over me, and the iron entered into my soul, and I longed to scream, and was dumb. I died 1,000 deaths as that awful morning wore on. I dared not faint, but words cannot paint what I suffered as I waited till the moment when he should open his eyes and be aware of my presence, for I was assured he knew it not. He had entered the chamber as a lair, when weary and gorged with his horrid orgy, and he had flung himself down to sleep, without a suspicion that he was not alone. Even his grasping my sleeve was doubtless an act done betwixt sleeping and waking, like his unconscious moans and laughter in some frightful dream. Hours went by. Then I trembled as I thought that soon the house would be astir, that my maid would come to call me as usual, and awake that ghastly sleeper. And might he not have time to tear me as he tore the sheep before any aid could arrive? At last, what I dreaded came to pass. A light footstep on the landing. There is a tap at the door. A pause succeeds, and then the tapping is renewed, and this time more loudly. Then the madman stretched his limbs and uttered his moaning cry, and his eyes slowly opened, very slowly opened, and met mine. The girl waited a while ere she knocked for the third time. I trembled, lest she should open the door unbidden, see that grim thing, and by her idle screams and terror bring about the worst. Long before strong men could arrive, I knew that I should be dead. The maid waited, no doubt surprised at my unusually sound slumbers, for I was in general a light sleeper and an early riser. But, reluctant to deviate from habit by entering without permission, I was still alone with the thing in man's shape. But he was awake now. I saw the wondering surprise in his haggard, bloodshot eyes. I saw him stare at me half vacantly, then with a crafty yet wondering look, and then I saw the devil of murder begin to peep forth from those hideous eyes, and the lips to part as in a sneer, and the wolfish teeth to bare themselves. But I was not what I had been. Fear gave me a new and a desperate composure, a courage foreign to my nature. I had heard of the best method of managing the insane. I could but try. I did try. Calmly, wondering at my own feigned calm, I fronted the glare of those terrible eyes. Steady and undaunted was my gaze, motionless my attitude. I marvelled at myself, but in that agony of sickening terror I was outwardly firm. They sink, they quail abashed, those dreadful eyes, before the gaze of a helpless girl, and the shame that is never absent from insanity bears down the pride of strength, the bloody cravings of the wild beast. The lunatic moaned and drooped, his shaggy head between his gaunt, squalid hands. I lost not an instant. I rose, and with one spring reached the door, tore it open, and with a shriek rushed through, caught the wondering girl by the arm, and crying to her to run for her life, rushed like the wind along the gallery, down the corridor, down the stairs. Mary's screams filled the house as she fled beside me. I heard a long-drawn, raging cry, the roar of a wild animal, mocked of its prey, and I knew what was behind me. I never turned my head. I flew rather than ran. I was in the hall already. There was a rush of many feet, an outcry of many voices, a sound of scuffling feet and brutal yells and oaths and heavy blows, and I fell to the ground, crying, "Save me!" and lay there in a swoon. I awoke from a delirious trance. Kind faces were around my bed. Loving looks were bent on me by all, by my dear father and dear sisters, but I scarcely saw them before I swooned again. When I recovered from that long illness, through which I had been nursed so tenderly, the pitying looks I met made me tremble. I asked for a looking-glass. It was long denied me, but my importunity prevailed at last. A mirror was brought. My youth was gone at one fell swoop. The glass showed me a livid and haggard face, blanched and bloodless as of one who sees a spectre, and in the ashen lips and wrinkled brow and dim eyes I could trace nothing of my old self. The hair too, jetty and rich before, was now as white as snow, and in one night the ravages of half a century had passed over my face. Nor have my nerves ever recovered their tone from that dire shock. Can you wonder that my life was blighted, that my lover shrank from me? So sad a wreck was I. I am old now, old and alone. My sisters would have had me to live with them, but I chose not to sadden their genial homes with my phantom face and dead eyes. Reginald married another. He has been dead many years. I never ceased to pray for him, though he left me when I was bereft of all. The sad weird is nearly over now. I am old and near the end, and wishful for it. I have not been bitter or hard, but I cannot bear to see many people, and am best alone. I try to do what good I can with the worthless wealth Lady Speldhurst left me, for at my wish my portion was shared between my sisters. What need had I of inheritances? I, the shattered wreck made by that one night of horror. So that was Horror, a True Tale by John Berwick Harwood. Now, it reminds me of that night I spent one time. We were in the Narrators Club, that exclusive club on Pall Mall in London, and we were sitting in the book-lined room in the wingback leather chairs, sipping port and smoking our cigars by the fire where the servants were coming in to lay for us. And I remember advice I was given by a fellow narrator who you will know, whose channel you will have listened to, and he said to me, Tony said, I want to give you some counsel. I said, what is that? I bleeped his name out there, so I do not wish to identify that gentleman. He said, never go full Gothic. I said, what? He said, you can go half Gothic, and that's okay, but never go full Gothic. And I'm afraid, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I have broken that rule with this story. I went full Gothic, and I'm not ashamed of it. At one point I felt I was channeling Matt Berry, to be fair. I really enjoyed that story, but I mean, it was like a story in two parts, wasn't it? The first part was like something out of Jane Austen, and I thought, oh yeah, here we go. And then the second bit with the slavering madman was, wow, it was the weather, it was the old castle, or the old manor house, it was the escaped lunatic, we had vampires thrown in, I even thought it was going to be a werewolf at one point, we had mutilated sheep, we had incredulous or tough squires, we had weird servants, not much of those to be fair. Mary, poor Mary, she's not called Abigail, she's called Mary, and to talk like Abigail is kind of a saying, isn't it? It's like Pollyanna, it's not really Pollyanna. Mary Sue, not really Mary Sue. And many other things like that. So so what a cracker! It's time for me to stop laughing, and I mean I liked it. I mean this is it. It's like Hammer horror, isn't it? You go and see a Hammer horror movie back in the day. I'm looking forward to going and see Nosferatu, the new Nosferatu. I haven't seen it yet. I'm not saying it will be like that, but jumping back to my previous thought, Hammer horror back in the day, how outrageously over the top and camp it was, and we knew it wasn't scary. Except it was a bit scary sometimes, but it was so outrageously over the top. It was glorious in its gothic outrageousness, and this was this. So from Jane Austen to, it was like, it was full of, there was the huge, the allusions to the great statue, Manfred in Castle of Otranto, the first gothic novel. It was, whether he did it on purpose, and he thought, I'm putting the whole sink in here. Everything's going in for the full gothic experience, but it was great. Anyway, time to focus on the crack. So this came out in 1861. It actually seems it's attributed to John Berwick Harwood. John Berwick Harwood, born 1829, 1899, was certainly not an heiress of 19. And neither am I. I'm not an heiress, I'm not 19, I'm not a woman, I'm not a Victorian. Anyway, let's talk about John Berwick Harwood, born 1828. So he was born 1828, he was English, and he was known for his ghost stories and contributions to various literary magazines. He was born at the Rookery, St Mary Crane, Kent, and he spent his life writing numerous stories, articles and novels, many of which were published anonymously. His writing career spanned several decades, during which he contributed to notable publications such as Once a Week, Castle's Family Magazine, Blackwood's Magazine, the Cornhill Magazine. He married Emily Mary Worsop Trollope in Ostend, Belgium. Now, I don't know about that, but I'm wondering if she was related to the famous author Trollope. He married her in 1850, so he was 32, and he died on February 16th, 1899, when he was either 70 or 71, depending. I don't know why it said that. Was buried in the Municipal Cemetery, Chertsey in Surrey in England. And he wrote over 20 novels and several Christmas horror tales. And he was actually quite a big cheese in his day, and a lot of these Victorian authors that we find were actually pretty well known in their time, but are no longer well known, and that is a warning to us all, isn't it? That's Ozymandias there, Percy Bysshe Shelley, there I am standing, huge statue, forgotten. Anyway, great poem, by the way. And I think I've done a version of that on the Classic Poetry podcast. So, horror, a true tale. And it wasn't a true tale. He's a fibber. It wasn't a true tale. But I've not been above that myself sometimes. Tongue-in-cheek. And this is a true story. If people believe it's a true story, it's scarier. Think about the Blair Witch Project. When people, and Amityville Horror. When people thought they were true. So the Blair Witch, of course, was clearly not a true story, but people believed it was and were scared out of their wits. Amityville almost certainly wasn't true as it was portrayed, but because people, including me, thought it was. Anyway, this story, horror, true tale, allegedly, was published in the January 1861 edition of Blackwood's magazine. Blackwood's was an Edinburgh-based literary journal of the Victorian era, and it was founded in 1817, and it published works by George Eliot, Joseph Conrad, Arthur Conan Doyle, but was particularly associated with Gothic and supernatural fiction. This story I got from the Valancourt Book of Victorian Christmas Ghost Stories. It's extremely Gothic, isn't it? Almost, as I was reading it, I was like, when was this published? So, 1861, but, really it felt like 1765. This was full-on Gothic, as I've already said. So was he deliberately pastiching the Gothic style? Because it doesn't feel... You read works from the 18th century and the language is slightly different. So it didn't feel like in language, but yet the tone and pace and the elements in it felt like 100 years before. And I just wonder whether he was doing that on purpose. As someone today might write a story, and I've done it set in the 1920s rather than the 2020s. Okay, Gothic to the core. An old Tudor mansion, come on. A mysterious, rarely used room. We've already got the secrets, the history. The isolation of the house, they've got to ride through fog and mire to get anywhere. The storms howling outside, come on. And then we have supernatural dread, and although the threat ultimately proves to be a human, he plays with the expectations, and it could be a vampire, could be I thought a werewolf, as I said. Maybe he wasn't into werewolves. It was a ghost, all these Gothic traditions. Remember in 1865 Dracula hadn't been published, Carmilla hadn't been published, but Varney the Vampire had, and was very popular. Old Dory's the Vampire, of course, it come before that, and various other German, and people, in Gothic, this is late, but in the early 1800s, German Gothic literature with the vampire and stuff like that, they were known to writers and readers of that period. The persecuted maiden as well. She's really interesting, Rosa, and as I say, she almost sounds at the very beginning. She's almost Jane Austen-like. She doesn't care about money. She feels lucky. She's got love. She lives in a nice big house. Mum's dead. Dad's a nice old gent, but hasn't got much time for her. It's like a Jane Austen novel, isn't it? That isn't a put down, by the way. Jane's very good, and she's cocky almost, or she. So the sin. Remember, I've talked many times about one of the ideas about horror stories is that the protagonist, or somebody close to them, but usually the protagonist has committed a sin of some kind. Often, think of Frankenstein, Victor Frankenstein, it's pride, hubris, isn't it? That's a really common sin. Go back to the Greek tragedies. The ancient Greeks were writing plays about people who were being punished for the sin of pride. So this is a really got a long pedigree. And so is it pride? Well, maybe. Is she a little bit full of herself? We are enjoined to be humble and not take our good fortune for granted, because it can be snatched away at any time, and is the gift of God, not ours, is not achieved by our own goodness. I wonder if that would be a useful thing for us all to remember, particularly the immensely wealthy amongst us. Not that I'm really jealous, of course, but it's really funny when you talk to people. People always put their own successes, not always, but often put their success down to their work, and everybody else's failure is down to their fecklessness. So what I'm saying is, I think I said that wrong. If I do well, it's down to me. If I do badly, it's somebody else's fault, you know? If somebody else does badly, it's their fault. If I do badly, it's not my fault, you know? And anyway, pride, how do we get onto that? The sin of pride. So she's pretty, she's the prettiest, the cleverest, and she's struck down by cruel fate, really. What other pride, what other sin could there be? I had another sin at the back of my mind. What you didn't see there was I stopped the recording and I sat here for 5 minutes stroking the dog like some kind of James Bond villain, pondering Bond's downfall. Whatever the sin, I think it's pride. I think that's her sin here. But poor girl. And she starts from this very sort of girl boss type. I love that phrase. I don't totally understand it, but I love it anyway. Like lots of the words I say. And, you know, she's cool. She's got it all. She knows her mind. She's powerful. She's got her agency. And then at the end, she hasn't lost her agency, but she's a wreck of herself, as she admits, because of this traumatic experience of the madman. And she isn't, but she does keep her agency in a sense, because people want to help her and she won't let them help. She's probably anxious avoidant. I don't know if you know about what they call relationship styles, but actually it's John Bowlby's idea about attachment, how you attach to your parent, and there are different attachment styles. Secure attachment is where everything is working well, and then we have anxious avoidant attachment. They change the name sometimes, and that is where the parent leaves, and when the parent comes back, we're like, didn't need you. And she has a little bit of that dismissive thing going on, you know. People, even the old Mrs. Spedhurst, Lady Spedlington, she offers her the room, and I've made her quite evil. I think I made her more evil than she actually was, because I made her kind of laugh in her voice. But she offers her the room, and then the lovely sister offers her the room, and at the end they offer to go and stay with her. It's not clear whether Reginald would have stayed with her, but she told him to go. The implication is, what I infer from it is that he went because she was too hideous, which is, you know, on the one hand, it's deplorable, isn't it? He should have stuck with her, even if she was a hideous wreck. He just sat crying in the corner and wouldn't go out and had no fun, and gibbered a lot with white hair and a wrinkled face. I have white hair and a wrinkled face, and I gibber. But you know, but realistically, if you were 20 odds, would you? Come on, honestly, would you? So I'm a bit easy on Reginald. It depends where you're coming from, I suppose, and that's what I always say about lenses, how we come to stories. Anyway, one of the he's gothic. He's got it all. He's got it all thrown in there. There weren't many weird servants, as I said. Just little Mary, and she wasn't too bad. So she wasn't too weird at all. So, and then what I thought was really, really good was this ellipsis. So ellipsis is a technique where you introduce something, you don't explain it till later. So he walked down the street. Hey, who? What? He looked in the shop. Ooh. I sound like an owl. Yeah, that's ellipsis. So the tall man, he's Stephen King. The gunslinger. We learn about the gunslinger, of course, but you know what I'm saying is, what he does all the time is, in this, talks about the change, the horror, the incident, and doesn't explain them. And we're like, what? And this opens a loop. We're curious, we want to know, so it's really effective. He uses it very liberally, but I thought it worked. Tantalising. What's going to go on? And we're on the edge of our seat wondering about what's next. And think about the technique of he doesn't do this, but thriller writers, they deliberately break the action. So, you know, here's the bad guy or the bad girl coming up, bad girl boss, coming up with an evil thing to do wicked nonsense, and what's going to happen? Stop. What? And that, it's just a cheap trick. This is what he does, the incident, the change. The other thing, of course, is very common, not common, but a recognisable trope in Victorian stories of this nature, like the old nurse's story. I'm an old woman now. I think Madame Crowell's Ghost's done the same by Lefanu. So, yeah, and they recount it from their aged situation and talk about what happened in their youth. That's not an uncommon Victorian thing. I think unless as a pastiche, I can imagine Susan Hill doing something like that, but deliberately. But I don't think many modern, like John Wick, he's not going to be sitting there going, "I'm an old man now." You know, he's not going to do it, is he? It's just the thing that's fallen out of fashion. Anyway, but I think that that thing there, but also this foreshadowing. And then also when he's talking about the monster, we don't know what the monster is. She talks about it as it stirred it, and then you're like, what is it? And it's the same thing. It's this ellipsis whereby she raises a question, what is it? And doesn't answer it, and it just creates this unbearable tension in us, which is, we love it. We absolutely love it. As long as it isn't done too much. If it gets too much, people throw the book down and go away. And one of the things I wanted to talk about, as I sometimes do, is presentism, because some of you, it depends who you are. But I know from the comments that some people will be, they view the story from as themselves living as they do now in San Diego in 2024, not somebody living in, I mean, when this story was set, 1800 in some remote part of England, and you're a princess or something, or a duchess or some lady, not a bus driver in Milton Keynes in 2024, you know. And they view it as if it's them. So, you know, we see this with I mean, some of them, you kept a dog outside. That's really common up until, and country people still do it, you know. That, you know, their dogs were working animals. They weren't like my spoiled monsters, cuddled up and given dinky dainties all the time, and oh my baby boo boo, you know. It's, you know, so the dog, it's just, that's what they did. But the dog Napoleon, nice name, and then the helplessness of Victorian women. So I'm going to say two things. I'm going to not contradict myself, but I'm going to, because contradictions are good, by the way. I'm going to have your left hand and your right hand. So on the left hand, I'm saying to you, she's a fairly privileged young woman by her own account. So don't feel too sorry for her. I mean, you know, okay, the monster, etc., etc. But was it a monster? Yeah, well, it wasn't. But you know, don't feel too sorry for her on the one hand, although bad things did happen, so we can feel a bit sorry for her. And then the other hand, the helplessness of Victorian women. Absolutely. True. So you can learn things from these stories, such as if you were to read a 1950s Superman comic, you would learn things about American attitudes in the 1950s, not necessarily American attitudes now, but you know, and this speaks to its place. So the contradiction is, I'm saying, don't judge the book by the present. It has nothing to say, there's nothing outside the text. But on the other hand, I'm saying, yeah, there is something outside the text. You can learn things. So it is valid to look at the plight of the woman and go, you know what, this is what Victorian women lived like, a certain class. Most of them lived far more horrible lives than that. So yeah, presentism, don't judge it, don't judge a story. I always say also that if you get exercised and riled up by something, then that means the story's worked for you. It's done something, you know. If you're totally indifferent to it, then the story didn't work at all. So yeah, presentism. So the two aspects, three aspects. One, the treatment of the dog. People will always comment on that. The second is the plight of a woman in Victorian times. And I'm saying, yes, but no, but yes, but. And the third thing was the treatment of the mentally ill. Some people will be outraged at how. See, you know, the funny thing is, I didn't think asylums were set up until 1890 in the UK, but there were madhouses, there were private madhouses much earlier than that, and there were workhouses. So in the early days when the workhouses were set up, because the problem was these people who had no means of supporting themselves became the county asylums later on, but the parish in earlier times, from the Vagabond Acts of the Tudor times in the 1500s, but became the responsibility of the parish to look after. And so as time went on in the early Victorian period of the 19th century, the workhouses were set up, as you know, and they were aversive, because we can never really get away from the idea that some people are just skivers, and so we need to make it really awful so that nobody would do it as a preference, you know. And this debate is still alive. I take no position on it. Well, I think, okay, yes, I have a position on it. Yeah, I think there are absolutely people who need help. And also I think there are people who work the system. And that is not me being... when I had student nurses, right, we would go out and we'd be working with people who were generally at the bottom of the socioeconomic pile, suffering with physical, mental health, all sorts of things. And I would say to my nurses, students, I'd say that the trick is to walk the tightrope. First of all, you must not lose your compassion. These are suffering people, and you are there to help them. That's number one. The second time, you must not lose your wits and realise some of them will try and work you to gain advantage, whether that be, you know, whatever benefit that might be. So, and that's true. So workhouses, but where this came from was saying that initially everybody who couldn't support themselves, and then later on, as the 18th century went on, they separated them into paupers and pauper lunatics, and they're treated differently. And you see people, mental illness is really interesting, because the laws that exist, I'm most familiar with the English law. It's different in Scotland, it's similar in Wales, it's different in Ireland, in Northern Ireland, and in the Republic of Ireland, of course. It's different in America, it's different in New Zealand. But the idea is that if I were to go out and attack someone, in whatever degree, a judgment will be made by the agents of the state, that is usually the police, who would come in contact with me. They would make a judgment whether I was mentally ill or not. And if I'm mentally ill, I am deserving of treatment, care and compassion, despite what I've done, and I will be treated in a hospital. That's the idea. However, the same action, the judgment is, if I am not mentally ill, I am vile, wicked, and will be punished. Right? It's the same action. It's the judgment of the police officer, who would then call a medic or a social worker, who would make that judgment, you know. And it's the same thing. So it's about how we view the action. Is the perpetrator a monster or a victim? What if they're both? What if they're both? And I always say this, you know, if you, again, it's the nuanced nature of these things. If you think that all people who are mentally ill are doves, then you're wrong. Because, and I'll tell you why, I'll give you a piece of evidence. If you go into a hospital and you go to the cardiac ward, or the orthopedics ward, or the maternity ward, they do not give you an attack alarm. If you go to a psychiatric unit, they will give you an attack alarm. So there you go. And it's the same thing. Not all people, they may be ill, but it doesn't mean they're safe. Many are safe. I've only been assaulted a few times in 20 years. Had a couple of knives pulled on me and stuff, but that's just the way it is. Now, you may be upset by me saying this, but I'm telling you the truth. So that's the third aspect, is how they treat the mentally ill. Clearly, harshly, they use chains and fetters, and he says almost how by use of brutality they thought they could knock the madness out of them. That doesn't happen, actually. So there we are. It's fascinating, and the reason I loved my career was because it was always ethically and morally, you're on your toes all the time. To do this thing of walking the tightrope, of being full of compassion and love for people and helping them and fighting their corner, to recognising the other side of the coin, where there was real, I nearly said wickedness, but we could take that apart. So, but probably not. We don't have time to do that, but it's worth thinking about. Maybe I don't mean wickedness, but certainly danger. There we are. So yeah, dogs, women, and the mentally ill. 3 things to get really upset about. Yeah, but remember, it's just a story. So don't get too upset. I hope the weather's treating you nicely, that you're not in some awful flood or hurricane or tornado or earthquake. The list goes on. I hope you're not there anyway, or if you are there, I hope it isn't as bad as it could be. Alright, take care, and Christmas is coming. For better or for worse. The Vicar's Ghost by Lucy Farmer. Chapter 1. A Mysterious Visitor. It was a half promise to my aunt, Mrs. Jacker of Porthmuree, that I wouldn't relate the incidents of the scare we had at the vicarage until the trouble had blown over. But as the whole business is now settled and done with, I feel released from my engagement and may explain the awful mystery. Folks down Porthmuree way tried to laugh us out of countenance, but Aunt Martha, whose married name is Jacker, a terribly suggestive name of donkeys, and how they never had any children is easy to account for. Aunt Jacker told me the whole story, and it came true almost to my face. Andrew Jacker, I nearly put 2 more letters on his name, was, when alive, the gardener at the vicarage where I spent last Christmastide with little Charlie, our eldest, in Cornwall. The place is very pretty, in a valley near the sea. The church is quite a show building, and the tower is built perpendicular, as they call it there. And of course anyone can see that. It's no wonder. If it was horizontal now, there would be something remarkable in it. We reached the lodge which Mrs. Jacker, my aunt, still inhabits, and found a hearty welcome. A Christmas welcome, I may call it, and truly so. There were all kinds of hollies and ivies and red berries galore, a delicious smell of mincemeat and apples, quite appetising, and a tea table spread out in a way which made me imagine that my late uncle was not so deserving of those 2 extra letters as I had fancied. He couldn't have been that kind and have left his widow so comfortable, and not even in black for him. We were early at tea after our journey, and were just gossiping when a knock came to the door, and little Charlie ran up to open it. He ran back quite quick enough, looking scared a bit, and saying, "Mammy, it's a man at the door, a clergyman." "Well, he won't eat you, child," cried my aunt quick-like. "Don't be a goose." I didn't quite like her manner of speaking to the boy, though having no children of her own, I could excuse her, but she rose up and went to the door in the dusk. She hadn't gone long when she came back with a red face ruffling like a turkey cock, making all allowances for genders, and without a word catches little Charlie a slap on the shoulder blade. "Here, Aunt Martha, what's this?" I cried. "What's Charlie done? I won't have him beat by anyone, except his father. So there!" "A bit of a brat to invent such untruths," she exclaimed. "If he was my child, I'd pound him." "Well, he isn't your child, Aunt, and as you never had one, you can't be expected to understand. Wasn't there anyone there, dear?" I said to him as he ran to my side. "Yes, Mammy," he whispered. "I saw him." "A man, Charlie?" "Yes, a clergyman, a tall man with a red face like hers. It's the truth." He pointed to Mrs. Jacker, who didn't much relish the reference. "I'm sure the child did see the man, Aunt," said I. "You wouldn't tell a falsehood, would you, Charlie?" "I saw him," said the lad firmly. "He had a whip in his hand and spurs, golden spurs on his boots." "Mercy on us!" screamed my Aunt Martha. "He's come! Oh dear! Oh dear! Oh dear!" She began to rock herself backwards and forwards like a seesaw, her apron thrown over her head and groaning all the time as if in pain. A hee-haw kind of complaint, which came from her husband's side, perhaps, most likely. I didn't heed her greatly, for after her behaviour to the boy, I didn't care very much about her fright, though I will not deny it, curious to find out the cause. Mine, it was rather fearsome. We 2 lone women in the lodge beside the wood of a darkening winter evening, well on towards Christmas. 19th of December it was. No one nearer than the vicarage up the long avenue, and the ghostly, creepy feeling in the rustling trees. Ugh! It was creepy. After a while, as the fire burned up more cheerful, and I'd made little Charlie shut the door, Aunt Martha took her apron off her head and looked around. "Come here," she said, looking at Charlie. He wouldn't stir. She called him again. "I won't hurt you, you little silly," continued my aunt. "Come here, I want you." "Oh, Charlie, Auntie won't hit you again, I'll be bound," says I, firm-like. She looked at me steadily, as if scenting the battle afar off, but there was no fight. "I didn't mean to hurt you, child," said she, patting Charlie's cheek in quite a motherly way. "Here's a sixpence for a Christmas box in advance. It wasn't your fault, child. I'm sorry I touched you. Kiss Auntie, Charlie, she's made you a nice present. There's a boy. Well, Aunt, what's happened?" said I. "Don't ask me, Lucy, I can't tell you. It's too dreadful anyway," she whispered. Of course, I knew quite well that this was only put off. A little pressing only was wanted, but I wasn't going to press her, so changed the subject to something else. To my great surprise, she went on quietly along the new track, and never breathed a syllable about the queer visitor as long as Charlie sat up. It was a clear, cold, moonlit night. As I took Charlie up in the little bed in my room, I could see the moon shining, and when I put the candle out, the room was quite light. Charlie promised to go to sleep, and so I left him, just closing the door so that we might hear him if he called out. I found Aunt Martha in the sitting room, knitting. As I come in, she put her needles down in her lap and looked at me steadily over her tortoise-shell spectacles. "Well, Lucy?" "Well, Aunt, what's the matter?" "Isn't it terrible? Aren't you afraid?" "Afraid of what, Aunt?" I cried in surprise. "What's terrible?" "Why, that man." "Why, who is he? Does he live here?" "Live here?" "Lucy, listen, I am counted a sensible woman. Isn't that so?" I said I had heard as much from her before. "What then?" "Lucy, farmer, mark my words, ponder and digest them. That was no living man your Charlie saw, and who we couldn't see. It was a spirit." I flopped down into a chair all of a heap as Aunt took up her needles, and, after a look round the room, began working again, with her face turned to the door and glancing up now and then as if she expected something or somebody. "A spirit? A ghost? You don't mean it." "Say you're only playing Christmas on me, Aunt Martha," I said at last. "I wish I could, Lucy, but I am sure, from your child's description of the man, that it's the old vicar." "What, the dead vicar?" "Yes, the one that was drowned. He can't rest in his grave, or, I should say, he can't rest in the sea, because he wasn't buried." "Did he fall into the sea then?" I asked. "He jumped in," whispered my aunt, as she glanced fearful-like round the room. "He was riding out from here one winter's day. It was the 19th of December, 88 years ago today, in the afternoon." "Well," said I, as she paused. "He was going over to the nunnery yonder," continued my aunt, putting down her needles again, "and wanted to go by way of the beach. He was mounted on his black horse, Neff, a fine, sensible beast, and the red vicar rode him at the cliff." "Mercy of us! Go on, Aunt." "But the horse wouldn't jump the cliff, and the vicar, heaven forgive him, swore he'd go no other way. He whipped and spurred the animal, but it wouldn't budge. At last the vicar got into a towering passion. He dismounted, gave his horse a cut with the whip, took off his gilt spurs, put them in his tail pocket, and swearing he would go his own way, leaped down from the cliff." "Was he killed?" "Dead as mutton," replied Aunt Martha. "He sometimes appears, spurs in hand, sometimes booted and spurred, ready to mount his house again. Many have seen him, and something always happens after he's been seen. We ought to tell the vicar, for something will surely happen before Christmas, Lucy." I was silent. The idea of walking up the avenue at that time of the evening, while a ghost was haunting the place, was awful. Besides, Charlie couldn't be left alone in the lodge, and I said so. Aunt Martha made no reply. "Has the ghost ever appeared before?" I asked, after a pause of silence, which was almost more dreadful than anything. "Yes," she replied, in a low voice. He has come 3 times, and every time something has happened. Once the church was robbed, and there never had been a sacrilege here afore nor since. The next time, Fillion, a brave lad of 11, was killed in the lane yonder by some most mysterious means in the storm, for a tempest always accompanies the appearance. And the last time the manor house was burgled, as Captain French called it, robbed, he meant. Well, we can't go up to the vicarage tonight, I said. If the storm should come on, we might get drenched, and I'm sure I would die if we met the ghost. Hush, said my aunt suddenly. Listen. Don't you hear something? I listened with all my ears, and after a minute I fancied I could distinguish a moaning sound, which rose and fell in a curious dull roar, but in the quieter intervals we could distinctly hear the clatter of a horse's feet. The sound came nearer and nearer. The animal was galloping like mad. No one could have ridden at such a pace, I should say, on such a night along the country road. My aunt made a dart at me and caught me by the arm. Lucy, we're dead, to a certainty. This is Neff, the galloping horse, the Red Vicar's horse. Listen. We stood up, close together, trembling like aspens. The noise came nearer and nearer. It passed in a few seconds. It died away in the distance. I went to the casement and threw it open. The murmuring sound was quite audible. It's the sea, whispered my aunt. The storm is brewing. Shut the window, Lucy, I bid you. I shut it and sat down. Then, after a spell of thinking, I said, Aunt Martha, I don't believe that horses have ghosts, and even so they wouldn't make that clatter. Perhaps we've been mistaken after all. Rubbish, she replied. I must say, Lucy, I'm surprised. I thought you had more sense. With this remark, the clock was striking 9, being a full half-hour slow. My aunt took up a candlestick from the little sideboard and walked away without even bidding me good night. Cornish manners, perhaps, I muttered to myself, but Cornish or not, no one shall make me believe in the phantoms of dead horses rushing about country roads before 12 o'clock at night, anyway. But we hadn't done with the ghosts yet. Chapter 2. The Man on Horseback. In the morning, the wind was blowing like mad. The trees were all bending in a direction away from the sea, and the roar of the wind in the branches, added to the loud murmur of the waves on the beach, made up a most alarming noise to one not accustomed to ghostly storms. There wasn't much rain, not heavy rain, but it made up in thickness and drifted in like smoke and steam, wetting everything in a second, and tasted of salt. But notwithstanding the weather, Aunt and I determined to go up to the vicarage and warn the vicar about the ghost of his forerunner. There's something going to happen, my aunt kept saying, until at last I began to wish that something would happen to her tongue for a while. We struggled through the avenue facing the seaway against the wind, and in about 10 minutes we came in sight of the house amongst the bare trees, which were bending and tossing and complaining about the way in which the wind was treating them. We went boldly up to the side door, round the laurel and hydrangea bushes, and inquired for the vicar. The young girl who came to the door told us we couldn't see him, he was very busy packing and would be off up to London in the afternoon. "Going to London?" exclaimed my aunt. "Never! Why, who's to christen Mary Hadwin's child the day after tomorrow, and all arranged special?" "I'm sure I don't know," replied the girl. "He told me this morning he wasn't to be disturbed when I knocked at his door. Mrs. Mumbles has a holiday, and George, the groom, is off after the mare. Master goes at 4 o'clock. A nice time to go riding about on Cornish roads, I thought. "Which way is he going up to London?" I asked. But bless you, the girl didn't know. Why, if it had been me, I would have found out all about it in no time. She hadn't been long at the vicarage, I supposed. She was pert enough, anyway, but prettier than any widower should have in his house, in my opinion. "Rubbish," said my aunt afterwards. "And him an old man of over 60, and a real old gentleman too. Rubbish, Lucy." Rubbish or not, I didn't like that girl, and said so. But as we couldn't see the vicar and weren't likely to, he being engaged in packing up, we had to go home again. driven up the avenue by the wind, and continually having to turn round and face it because of its interference with our skirts. A regular bother on a windy day, and lucky we were in private. "What did that hurt young woman say about the groom and the mare, Aunt?" says I, as we turned away home. "George has gone after it somewhere. I wonder where. What'll the vicar do without it? He has only the one animal." "Aunt," said I, stopping and turning round to the wind, "listen to me. Don't you remember that we heard a runaway animal last night, pounding down the road in a terrible way? Perhaps the vicar's mare was frightened and ran away when the ghost of the other horse came into the stable." My aunt shook her head and then settled her bonnet and hair, being flustered. "Lucy, my dear, mark my words. There's a great danger hanging over this place. A magpie darted out of our copse this morning, and the chimney smoked, which is sure signs. Mercy on us! Listen to the wind. There'll be wrecks tonight, and a spring tide too. Come home." We struggled on and didn't dare to put our noses outside the cottage all day. You never saw anything like that storm. The wind tore up the trees and smashed branches. Birds were dashed to pieces on the perpendicular tower of the church. Aye, jackdaws were killed in the very roof, found dead in the gutters on the next Sunday. The swish of the rain and the clouds of spray which were swept over the cliff, you'll hardly believe. Great masses of white stuff came up that hill, like birds, people told me. And next day, when we were all on the run because of the vicar, I myself saw lumps of foam lying in the fields. Little Charlie was afraid of the roaring in the chimney, and we were glad enough, I can tell you, when one of the keepers came in about 6 o'clock to see how we were. He trembled a bit when we told him about the ghost. "We'll keep a lookout tonight," he said, as he went away up to the village, buffeted by the wind and regularly blown round the corner. "Why will they keep a lookout, Aunt?" I asked. "Because of the vicar's ghost," she replied. "It's sure to appear in the church tonight. At least it's said to come there and walk. A dim light, like a corpse candle, is to be seen by those who have the courage to go out. You'll hear the people presently." "I've never seen a ghost," I began. "You don't mean that you think of going out to look for it?" shouted Aunt, staring at me as if I had 7 heads. "Well, if others go, why shouldn't I? Nothing from the next world can harm us," I said. "Can't it?" she retorted with a sniff. "An appearance killed poor young Fillion, and he 11 years old. He was out in the storm, Aunt, wasn't he? Well, suppose he was. Would the storm crush his skull in and lay him by the roadside, a tangled corpse? No wind as ever blew could punch in people's skulls. Don't tell me. There's true, real danger out tonight. It's terrible, so it is." Of course, I said no more. The storm seemed abating, and about 10 o'clock we were both thinking of going to bed when a quiet knocking was heard at the door. We sat still as mice and looked at each other. My aunt's face was the colour of tallow, and I dare say mine wasn't much better. I couldn't stir an inch to save my life. The ghost had come again. "It's there!" gasped my aunt. "Mercy on us! Pray, Lucy!" If you'll credit me, I couldn't. I could no more repeat a prayer that minute, though were 6 at my finger ends and all the creed on the tip of my tongue. No use. I couldn't speak. And the knocking continued. Suddenly my aunt whispered, "Send the boy. It won't hurt him." "Send Charlie, in his nightdress too, to meet a wandering ghost of a suicided parson? Not I. You wouldn't catch me sacrificing an innocent lamb like him to the evil one." I rose up then myself, and, with a quaking at my heart and a quaver in my voice, called out, "Who's there?" "It's me, Robinson," replied the keeper. "I've heard a rumour as there's something up at the vicarage, and I've come down to see after it." My aunt by this time was behind me and opened the door without a blush, saying, "Come in, Mr. Robinson. Whatever is it? The ghost? We thought it must be you." "No, ma'am, not the ghost. Phyllis, our neighbour's lass, has come down with the cream, and the story is there's no one in the house and there's a light in the church moving about." "Robbers!" I exclaimed. Ghosts! Cried my aunt. I knew it. Well, it's a queer thing, and we're going to see about it. The girl's gone with the master, they do say. What girl? Shrieked Aunt Martha. Not the pert hussy up at the house, surely, said I. That's it, he said. Susan has bolted, and someone has reported she was seen with the master on the coast road this afternoon. The old goose, I cried. What did I tell you, Aunt Martha? I took that girl's measure pretty quick. Well, nothing will persuade me that the vicar has gone with her outside the paths of duty. No, Lucy Farmer, vicar's a clergyman, and ghosts from the churchyard wouldn't persuade me otherwise. Besides, who'd go along the beach road such a night as this? It ain't so out of the way bad now, remarked Robinson. I'm going down. I'll go with you, said I. Well, I ain't going to be left like an owl in an ivy bush, said my aunt. It's too terrifying. I'll go too. But the child, I cried. Suppose he wakes up. Oh, he won't stir. It's only 10 minutes or so. He's old enough to lie quiet if he does wake. He'll see the candles lighted. So we agreed to run down and see the ghost. The rain had ceased. Escorted by Robinson, who had a lantern, we soon reached the churchyard, which was close by, near the village side, by the inn, where the stream is, in the road, and at the stile we found every living soul in the place. Outside the night was pitch dark. The great perpendicular tower was quite lost in the gloom. The trees tossed about and roared, the ivy fluttered and rustled in a most alarming way, and sure enough, inside there was a light, which moved about the chancel and the east window, which was half choked with ivy. But no one would venture near the doors, and we couldn't hear any sound but the terrible roaring of the wind and a banging noise at times. Suddenly, the light went out and we all jumped. Then, in the darkness, and in the middle of the roaring of the storm wind which seemed increasing, the sound of a horse's hoofs were heard clattering down the hill. "It's the horse! The horse!" cried the women, and before you could wink, every man, woman and child present took to their heels and ran for dear life to the houses, anywhere. They had all squeezed themselves into doorways and sheds, like a general post in the nursery games at the manor in 1 minute. The clattering hoofs came nearer and nearer. I was squeezed into the inn door. I couldn't tell what had become of Aunt and the keeper. I wished my husband had been there, but it was no use wishing. The hoofs came down the hill faster and faster, banging fire out of the flints as we could see. The ghost rode right up to the road and stopped for a moment. Then he made up his mind and came towards the inn. The women pushed back and shut the door with a bang in its face. Now, would it blast us with fire or come in through the door? We waited, shaking and quaking to see what would happen. And then we heard a noise and a loud kicking or thumping at the door. Nobody dared move. Besides, it was after closing time. No one could be admitted. But the rider would not be denied. "Mr. Hawkin," I say, "Hawkin, open the door. There's mischief about." "Aye," muttered Hawkin, "and it shall remain outside. Go your ways in peace," he said aloud. "Go on, go on." "Come, no nonsense," shouted the ghost, if it was a ghost, which I, for one, began to doubt. "Open the door or I'll smash it in. Don't you know me? George Syme." "George? From the vicarage?" cried several. "Why, what brings you here at this time of night?" "On horseback, too," said others. "Maybe it's only a device of the evil one," suggested the sexton. "I'd be careful if I was you, Mr. Hawkin." But a sounding kick and a few hard Cornish words settled the question. Hawkin went to the door, expostulating loudly against violence and ghosts. Chapter 3. The Ghosts in the Church. A Discovery. "Ghosts be hanged!" exclaimed George as he strode into the passage, having slipped the bridle over a hasp in the wall. "What's all this mean?" "What's what mean?" asked Hawkin, who, with us all, was recovering his composure. The other people who had run away were gradually coming out, like rabbits from their burrow after a shot has alarmed them. "Why all this about Master and Susan?" The house is locked up, master's away, and everyone's not at home. What's up? It's the vicar's ghost, George. It's in the church. Nonsense, exclaimed the groom. We've seen it, cried his audience. Seen your grandmother, retorted the groom, who was perhaps nearer the truth than he knew or suspected. Where's master? Gone to London. Who says so? Asked the man, turning on the speaker. It's not true. He wouldn't go like that. Young man, I said, pushing my way nearer, I can tell you it is true. Mrs. Jacker, my aunt, and me went up to see your master this day, and that minx named Susan said he was packing up. Now, you see why. She and he have gone off. Why? She was as good as promised to me, cried poor George. Some of your guesses, that. Aye, George, we do, muttered some sympathetic voices. We almost knows it. Well, there, is it natural that she'd go and run away with my master, as honourable a gentleman as ever stepped? Nah, there's something behind all this. It's the vicar's ghost, George. He came last night. And let Comet loose, I suppose. Rubbish. But why she bolted or how, I couldn't make out, I must say. She did bolt then, George. Aye, and opened the stable door into the bargain. I've been after her ever since daylight, and found her in Sadler's farmyard off by Ferry Bridge yonder. I'd been on her tracks for hours. I wish Mr. Mulholland or Squire Driven was home. We could fix up something then. What shall we do, Mr. Hawkin? Find out what's inside the vicarage, or in the church, some sensible man in the crowd said. Oh, very well, but we're incapable of it, said the groom. Besides, Keyes is in the vicar's study, remarked the sexton. Drat that ghost, he should be laid by now. Listen to the wind. Someone's busy tonight. Shh, man. You can't tell who's listening. Let's up to the vicarage and go in, if us can, said the sensible man again. That's it, I cried. Perhaps it's only a trick the vicar may be playing on you. Playing ghost. And Susan gone off? Not likely. But come you up to the parsonage, and I think we may get in by the study window. Mr. Atkins, don't call it burglary now. No, replied the sensible voice. I'll not arrest you, George. Come along. Then I discovered that the constable, the only one for miles around, was the most sensible of all. Certainly we did find out queer things that night, as everyone never suspected. Mr. Atkins, of such gifts, he being mostly silent, the landlord, who, as the saying goes, could talk the hind leg off a donkey, was looked on as far the cleverest man and the most gifted, but he didn't hide his candles under a pewter in any way I could see, and the very idea of candles made me think of Charlie in the cottage asleep, all alone. We'd better go up, I thought. Just then Aunt Martha came to me and said, Why, here you are, Lucy. I'm going home. Quite right, Aunt. It's dreadfully stormy, says I. Will you find your way easy? Quite easy with the lantern, she said. There's no ghost I don't believe in. There is rheumatics. Don't be late, Lucy, now. But bring me the news. I promised to do so, and she toddled off with another woman who lived top of the hill. Then, being easier in my mind, I went with the crowd to the parsonage, and the groom, accompanied by the policeman to see fair play, put himself inside the study window, by the light of lanterns which flashed about like big fireflies, throwing queer shadows on the walls, and making giants of small people, sprawling them out on the sides of the house like imps. The constable handed the groom a light into the study, and then the window was shut down. In a moment or two candles were lighted within, and then George came into the hall with a light to open the door to the constable. Now, you can't all be coming in, said he. The vicar wouldn't like his house trampled on. Maybe he's inside all the time, so stand back. The people didn't like this. They began to grumble. Parson wouldn't mind, they said. Well then, I won't have it, said the constable. We'll have a few. Mr. Hawkin here, and Mr. Robinson. Mrs. Hawkin and the lady yonder, who's a friend of the family from London, I understand. This was myself. We six will do all there is to be done and let you know. So keep quiet, or I'll have you charged at Truro. 6 is plenty, sir, we four said, feeling quite certain of our own share in the matter. Plenty, assented the groom. Now, we're 4 men and 2 women. Let us divide and take a lady with each party. Who'll go upstairs and who down? His eye happened to rest on mine, so I said, let's begin upstairs and you try the basement. Very well, he said. I, with Mr. Hawkin and the missus, will go below. Mr. Atkins with you, ma'am, and Mr. Richardson will begin at the top, and we'll meet in the drawing room yonder, upstairs, when we've finished. Now, quiet, please, all of you. Any news? You'll hear quick enough. The people in the hall stood quiet, and as we ascended the staircase, we could hear the terrible howling of the wind, and fancied that we could distinguish the thunder of the waves beating on the rocky coast as the tide came in. It was a terrible night for the ghost. That's Mr. Penlyon's room, whispered the constable as we passed the door. Shall we try it, or go on? He asked, holding up his candlestick. Go on and work down, said Mr. Robinson. So we went on, and very soon examined the upper rooms. Susan's apartment was first visited. Very few things were visible in it. A dress hanging up behind a door, a trunk and some bandboxes, a pair of old boots, and some other articles thrown anyhow on the bed and on the floor. Didn't look like the trim, tidy, pert maid we'd seen that morning. She had evidently been hurried in her movements. She's bolted, I should say, remarked the constable. She's taken light things and left her box. What's in it, I wonder? Clothing such as became a waiting woman, a few books and some letters. But the clothes were new and clean. A pair of boots attracted my attention. They were rather large. Fine foot she had, I remarked as I took them up. Why, what's these? I stopped again and pulled from under her clean things a pair of trousers, checked pattern, which had evidently been worn a good deal. This is a queer start, said the constable. Let's turn out the Jade's box at once. We did so very quickly, and the rest of a suit of male attire, such as might be worn by a lad of 16 or so, a flash suit, the constable called it. Well, so Miss Susan was fond of masquerading, said he, after inspecting the clothes. Did anyone ever see her in boys' clothes, I wonder? While he was pulling about the trunk, I opened the drawers in the dressing table and found a large quantity of false hair nicely done up. In another place were combs and brushes, paste, rouge and powders, and brushes like painters, camel hair things, so she could alter her face as she pleased. The hussy, I remarked. I sort of glad she was a bad one. I told my aunt so. Look at those things. A regular inted Jezebel. The men were surprised, I can tell you. Aye, she's a bad one, said the constable. Suspect she's bolted with some valuables, not with Mr. Penlyon at all. She's a thief. Never, said Robinson. The two was together, that's certain as sin. Come you and see further. Here's George and his party coming up. What cheer, George? Nothing particular. Plate chest's locked all right, cellar locked too. Can't find the silver candlesticks though in the pantry, bedroom pair, likely in master's room. Well, we found nothing upstairs but Susan's things, including a lovely head of hair, said Mr. Atkins. George Syme started. A head of hair? He exclaimed, staring at the speaker. Aye, never mind now. Come into the vicar's room. Ooh, aye, it's locked. There's no key. Locked, we exclaimed in a chorus. Then he must have gone, we thought. Everyone drew back and looked in turn at everyone else. Leave it till we've searched elsewhere, said sensible Atkins, and if we find any more suspicious things, or don't find something to satisfy us, then, by George, I'll break the door. Where's the church keys? In Parson's study, piped the sexton. They're hanging on a nail behind the press door. We all hurried into the study. The keys were not there. Curiosity now was getting to a high pitch. We no longer minded the storm.
"Their keys is in the church door," squeaked the lad who just entered. "I felt him in the lock, I did."
"You're a sensible idiot, Ben," cried the constable, putting on his hat. "Now, them lanterns. Come along." We hurried out and went boldly enough into the churchyard and up the gloomy path between the graves of the dead, graves of people who had been drowned or cast ashore dead, who had died in their beds. Men, mostly, as I'd already seen. We reached the church porch, and as the lantern was held up to the lock of the old oak door, we perceived the key dangling from the keyhole. The door was locked, too. By this time, our fear of the ghost had considerably subsided, and, notwithstanding the howling of the storm and the rushing gusts of wind around the church, little hesitation was shown. Mr. Atkins was quite bold, and several of his immediate followers were brave enough. The hinder ones came in with the lights, being fearful to remain outside in the dismal darkness and whirling wind. Mr. Atkins, leading the way and carrying a lantern, stepped up between the old carved pews, on which scenes of scripture were engraved, with doves and eagles and coats of arms. He stood still near the font and called out loudly, "Is anyone here?" No one replied, except an echo in the chapel. So he shouted again. This time we heard a moan come from the east end, and a terrible chill struck me. I dare say others felt the same. We had shivers. It was a very weird feeling. The shadowy church, just light enough to make the darkness visible, the howling wind in the belfry overhead, the dangling ropes and humming bells, all united to make our flesh creep. And then the moan was so sad and weary. Keeping close together, the men in the front, we straggled up the aisle and examined the chancel. No one was there except ourselves. But within the communion rails, near the vestry door, lying prone on the floor, quite exhausted, was an elderly woman. "Why, it's Mrs. Mumbles!" cried 2 or 3 of the spectators. "How did she come here?" "Never mind how she came, let's get her out. The light's accounted for now," said George. The fainting woman was raised up and carried out to the inn, where she found voice enough to say, "Robbed, murdered, the master, the master." Some of us needed no more. Mr. Atkins rushed away, followed by Robinson, George, myself, and the Hawkins. We all guessed that the secret of Penlyon's disappearance lay in the bedroom, which was locked. Robbery and murder are ugly words. A few well-directed blows stove the door in, and the men entered first with lanterns and candles. Sure enough, on the floor under the bed was the old vicar himself, Mr. Penlyon, dabbled in blood and apparently lifeless. The private safe was ransacked, the chest of drawers turned out. Many papers and some valuable articles were on the floor. Everything was topsy-turvy, but someone who knew the place had been there, for the secret drawers were forced open. By this time the ghost was entirely forgotten, and the doctor was quickly fetched from his house, about 3/4 of a mile away. He came, and, having examined the poor vicar, concluded that he had had a severe blow on the head that would come round. The gentleman then went and prescribed for Mrs. Mumbles, and the people gradually dispersed, after leaving a nurse with the parson, and George downstairs to see what was missing from the chests which had been robbed and locked up again. Mr. Atkins stayed also, but I made my way home with Mr. Robinson and reached my aunt's cottage as the clock was whirring out 1. "Well," said Aunt Martha, "a pretty time in the morning to come home, and with Mr. Robinson. What's the matter?" Then I told her, and her face was a caution.
"I knew it. I said so. The ghost did it. Is the vicar dead?"
"Not yet," I replied, "but I'd have those 2 villains hanged if I had my way. A pair of ruffians, burglars, both wicked men as ever stepped." "What men do you mean, Lucy?" she asked. "Why, the men who robbed and nearly killed Mr. Penlyon, Susan, and—" "You said men?" "Lucy," interrupted Aunt. "And isn't Susan a man?" "Of course he is. A made-up young villain who bamboozled the old vicar and nearly canoodled George the groom. I saw through the paints and the false hair. Yes, I told you, he was no good." "Let's get to bed," said Aunt Martha, who never could bear anyone to have praise. If she'd found it out, there would have been hot water and something for a late supper, with a chat before bedtime. I know, but there was no sign of it. So we went to bed, tired out and a little thirsty too. Next morning we were astir pretty early and in the village after a short breakfast. Everyone was chattering. Mrs. Mumbles had said something, but being short of teeth, at the best of times was indistinct. Being upset, and no wonder. We made out that a man had called on the previous night, a red-faced man, and made some inquiries. He then must have gone round to the stables and loosed Comet, which he galloped up the avenue and off over the hill. And at any rate, the mare, being frightened, went off at speed, and when he had thrown her out, the man must have left her and made his way back to the vicarage in the morning early. With the assistance of Susan, he seized and stunned the vicar. Susan had previously locked old Mumbles in the church and said she was away on a holiday. This put people off. George was after the mare, Mumbles locked up, and the burglar, who we took for a ghost, packed up all he could find with his friend's assistance. Susan had taken service there as a maid in order to better carry out the robbery, which yielded a quantity of plunder in silver plate, money and objects of value, all which Miss Susan knew very well where to find, for the vicar was wealthy. These particulars came out by degrees, and meantime, while we were discussing the ghost and the robbery, the previous appearances on the same day in former years and their consequences, the men on horseback or on foot were searching roads and paths, sending flying telegrams all over the district, even launching boats when the weather moderated. We females also tried to find the runaways, and some of us at low tide investigated the caverns on the shore, where in old times smugglers used to hide themselves and their plunder. And in one of these great recesses the burglar's plunder was found. Worse than that, the body of the pretty fair-skinned boy who had played parlour-maid and deceived even George Syme was discovered, dead. He looked asleep, but was cold and stiff. The traces of seaweed and bits of driftwood beside and around him showed how he had died. The high spring tide had overwhelmed him in his sleep and suffocated him. In the cave higher up was a bag, a heavy small sack containing most of the plunder. Of the older burglar we found no trace. Whether he had escaped or had been carried off by the sea, no one ever knew. And I don't think anyone cared. But many of us were sorry for the lad, a pretty dark-haired boy about 16, with handsome features. As we saw him first on the beach, with a dress skirt on over his other clothes, he looked like a pretty sleeping girl. Some women cried, and not a man said a word against him. The vicar would have buried him had he been well enough after the first inquest inquiry, but some other gentleman did. Found drowned was the verdict, and the handsome boy was put underground in a nameless grave. It was very sad indeed, and I'd rather not say any more about it. Some people came to the conclusion that the vicar's ghost was all nonsense, but it isn't. The ghost appeared long before the robbers made it an excuse for robbing the vicarage. We think the burglaries were done by the same man who, made bold by impunity, tried a big stroke at last. What became of him? We can't tell. Why he left the cave? We can only guess. Perhaps he meant to return and was prevented by the high tide, or swept away by the waves while trying, or perhaps he fell down the rocks and was washed away. At any rate, we never heard of him again, and don't want to hear. Mr. Penlyon recovered, but could give little account of the incidents. Mrs. Mumbles told us how she found a piece of candle in the vestry and walked about the church hoping someone would release her. She called out and beat the door, but we were all too frightened to go near the ghost, as we thought her. We had not a very merry Christmas after all these tragic events. But Aunt and I, little Charlie and his father, who came down, managed to enjoy ourselves. We left the village without hearing any more of the vicar's ghost on New Year's Eve, and I was not sorry to be home near Cardew Manor once again. That was The Vicar's Ghost by Lucy Farmer. And even now there are people seething in Truro and Penzance over their eggnog, because I did it in a North Country accent rather than a West Country accent. But I doubt the West Countryness of that story, you know. When you look at Lucy Farmer, there's not much to be said about her. That's the only story you can find. I got it from the Valancourt book of Christmas ghost stories, which has been a very useful resource when I've been looking for Christmas ghost stories. But as of Lucy Farmer, no, she's a ghost. What we do know is this The Vicar's Ghost was published on December the 20th and 27th, so day after Boxing Day and before Christmas. They had their marketing then for Christmas stuff, didn't they? It was their Black Friday, really. You can't move away from Black Friday. Somebody was saying about Black Friday, you know. Can you get discounts on food or rent or anything at all useful? No, but you can get the new electronic thing and some more electronic nonsense that you don't really want, but you can get that. But heavily marketed like this, like Christmas is really. So 20th, 27th, 1890, the Victorian period. So as I say, it was put in the Valancourt book of Victorian Christmas Ghost Stories, Volume 3. I can find nothing about Lucy Farmer. It's interesting that the protagonist is also called Lucy, which I thought was quite funny. Why do I not think it's a proper Cornish story? And it's set in Cornwall. But some of the turns of phrase seem quite northern to me. The woman from top of the hill. Now, not in my particular dialect of Northern English, but in some, the definite article, the, in standard English, is elided completely. Yeah, it just doesn't exist. Sometimes we'd say that as a Gandon tone. We wouldn't say, I'm going down to the town. The T and the T have kind of got together. So what is the history of the Northern English tuh? They don't say it in Scotland, and they don't say it in Northumberland. So it would appear that it comes from those areas of being Scandinavianised during the early medieval period. The Danelaw in those parts of England that were heavily influenced by Scandinavian speech. So if you know German, you have die, der, and das. Das, T goes to S in German, like Cornish, funnily enough, although Cornish isn't related. But so dat, and in Dutch it's het, and it's related to it, of course, in standard English. So it's the neuter version. So that, it was in Old English. Think about the famous Yorkshire song on Ilkley Moor, bar tat. A bart is without, but hat, the hat. So in Northern English dialects, I hope I'm not losing you, the is usually tuh, just tuh. Sometimes that disappears completely, and in this story, it disappeared a couple of times. Woman from top of the street or whatever. Yeah, that just felt northern to me. Also, Porth Muckery. Yeah. Porth, yeah, that's Cornish, but Muckery sounds more Manx or Irish, or from Galloway in the southwest of Scotland. Fillion, again, Fillion is a Gaelic name, it's not a Cornish name. Also, she goes back to Cardew Manor. Now, Cardew is a Brittonic name, as in Cornish, meaning the Black Fort, probably a Black Fortified farm, but Cardew is actually up in the north of England, it's near Carlisle, where I am. So I think she was a northerner. It was published in the Express and Advertiser when I do my due diligence on, where was this paper? The Express and Advertiser appears to be a Lancashire paper. It appears to be from Burnley. So I actually think that this is a northerner writing a story set in Cornwall. Okay? This is a very, very long way of me justifying why I didn't do it in a Cornish accent. The simpler reason, of course, is I would have sounded like a pirate all the way through, and all the people in Cornwall would have been writing comments like people do. I did Madame Crowell's Ghost, which was written by an Irishman, but is written in Northern English dialect, and I did it in my grandmother's accent, which nobody really, it's died out. I mean, some of the old people still speak like that, the old Cumberland accent. But some fella complained about that, and he said nobody talks like that. he said that it was a mix of Middlesbrough, which I can get, like, because I think we do talk like proper Middlesbrough. And what else did he say? Middlesbrough and Cumbria, which it was, and Sheffield, because I didn't get that at all, because I have a lot of time for a Sheffield accent, which I find most euphonious, but it's not like a Cumberland accent at all. Anyway, that's that. So that's how I did it. Yes, indeed. I'm on the run to Christmas now. We've got our Christmas lights up outside, but not inside. I've got the Christmas decorations out, but I'm waiting for the permission from Sheila. Anyway, I suppose this is a long way of me saying there's not a ton of things to say about the story. I thought it was fun. I thought her characterization was great. I thought she absolutely acutely observed the manners of the provincial country folk. And that isn't an insult at all, because I'm very fond of the provincial country folk, possibly being one of them myself. And, you know, and the way they interact with each other and their attitudes, I thought was great. Aunt Martha, you can probably tell I really enjoyed doing it. And the way she talked about Aunt Martha when she chastised the little boy Charlie, and it is just like, you know, not having any children herself, which was a backhanded dig really. And there's some reason, I think the inference there was that she was too ugly, that this is why she never had children. I think I may have missed that, or I may have been unkind in thinking that, but I think that's what Lucy Farmer was trying to say. And, you know, almost Dickensian characterizations, comic characterizations really, of Mrs. Mumbles, and the handsome cabin boy. It almost felt like he should be a cabin boy, Susan. The handsome cabin boy, Susan. So as I was reading that, I thought, well, isn't that a turn up for the books? Was she, you know, normally in our times, these things of men passing as women have become current and popular discourse and certainly controversial. But was she foreshadowing our... I don't think she was, to be fair. I think it was just a thing, you know. I mean, men have always dressed as women, and women have always dressed as men. And I don't have a problem with that. So, there we are. Yeah. It is a case of what we call the explained supernatural. So, I've said this before when talking about ghost stories. What happened was, science came along in the Enlightenment, and there was basically, if scientists got themselves interested in religious matters, they got burned alive. So an agreement was made for a split, where the church would look after your spiritual aspect, and you, other people, your scientists, can go off and do the material. So that led to a weird fixation on the material, whereby there is no spiritual in it. And this became the most popular discourse and so we ended with materialism related physicalism, and people like Richard Dawkins and Luke Dennett and people like this still think this is wrong, of course. I mean, I say that, but it's still wrong. I know Richard Dawkins is a super duper genius, but it's still wrong. So the idea was that everything was physical, and anything supernatural it didn't exist. It was either a lie or a delusion of a fool, really. And so what happened was, so in the mid 18th century, late 18th century, and throughout the Victorian period, you have the kind of polite discourse, which is to say, eschew the supernatural, because if you believe in stuff like that, you're a credulous fool, and you won't be accepted in polite company. So, and of course, at the same time, there's that strand. But the other strand is that these stories are vulgar, in the sense of they deal with vulgarness of heightened emotions on the dark side. So this is comic, but the whole gothic thing. This leads me to say something about the division between detective stories, of course I have the Detective Stories channel, and ghost stories. But you know, the Gothic story was full of fright, it was full of manipulating emotion, and it tended towards spectacle. And so spectacle is where emotion is just deployed for the sake of emotion, like a jump scare. What does it mean? Does it have any larger part to play in in the story or characterise it. No, it's dropped there just cause. It's like Dumbo the flying elephant. What is the point of Dumbo? Now, come on, somebody's going to write a comment about pointing out how important Dumbo is, and I'm not saying he isn't. I loved the film when I went to see it when it came out when I was a very small boy. But you see what I'm saying about sensation. So, and it's like sort of 1980s gore horror. A lot of that is just spectacle. It's only intended to generate an emotion. I mean, this is done a lot. The news do it a lot as well, of course, because strong emotion sells. We are interested, we are drawn, we are magnetized by strong emotion, whether that be horror, whether that be, soppy love, and that can be vulgar as well, can't it? If it's too crass or too insipid. I don't mean crass and sugary sweet. They're like, ugh. Teenagers know that. They go, ugh, all the time. Whether they do, I don't know. I certainly used to do that as a teenager, and still do. But so strong emotion and classically pornography, and so many stories are written just to titillate or push this emotion, and the Gothic was the origin of all of them, really. I think the Gothic is the origin of pornography. Well, I mean, there's always been pornography, but pornographic novels, if you like. I think it's the origin of horror novels. I think it's the origin of detective novels. We have to take a step forward. So often the Gothic was mysterious. There were mysteries that needed to be resolved, and they often would be with legacies and wills and somebody not being who they thought they were. Their dead father was actually a French aristocrat, whereas they were brought up as a pig herder's son, swine herd's son. That another point there is the word burglarise, which she doesn't use, because of course in British English you don't burglarise, you just burgle. And I'm going to tell you something that I hope doesn't offend you too much. On this side of the so-called pond, we have been known to smile wryly at the tendency of our American cousins to add syllables to perfectly normal words, and burglarise is a case in point. It's like taking a noun, a burglar, and adding that suffix "eyes" to it, where there's a perfectly good verb anyway to burgle. As Tolkien will let you know. Anyway, I hope you're not offended by that. I thought I'd let you in on the secret, so I don't want you to be wrong-footed in any discussions. And you can deploy that now, and you can go, if you're speaking to some snooty Brit, and you're not a snooty Brit like myself, you can say, I know you think this, but, and then you can say, there's very good reason to do that. Another tendency of American English is, of course, to use acronyms rather than, and British English uses shortenings. So we would say telly for television, whereas the American tendency with TV is to put things. And American speech is winning in this because I think even here we now use acronyms rather than our old faithful just shortening things. And making pet versions of the words. I think I wandered slightly from the story there. I was talking about detective stories and with the Gothic. So the Gothic is full of mysteries that need to be resolved and uncovered. And it's not a long leap to end up with somebody who's uncovering. So you have from the protagonist of the story that needs to do this, you end up with somebody who's a repeat solver, and you end up with the amateur sleuth in the early Poe's Auguste Dupin is probably one of the earliest, if not the earliest, amateur sleuth. So from being just, instead of just being a maiden lost in the castle who has to work out who her dad is, who her real father is, and solve the mystery of the missing diamond or something, you get repeat sleuths like Auguste Dupin, of course, Sherlock Holmes, etc. And then you get the whole, and that catches on, and you get the whole, these Hercule Poirot, you get repeat, everybody's got Mrs. Craggs, you go on the detective, Monty Egg, you go on the detective story podcast that I've been doing, you'll find that nearly all writers get this character and they just deploy him or her in smartly, in story after story after story. Okay, but Poe takes the Gothic sensation novel, if you like, with its shocks and its horrors and its mysteries, which were considered, as I said before, utterly vulgar by the realist novelists of the 18th century. And therefore you get this split. And ultimately, the Gothic is a source of science fiction as well, isn't it? So you have, in the 18th century, those realist novels, and the realist novels become literary fiction, where we have realistic descriptions of people being miserable in a cafe in New York in the rain, and nothing happens. And apart from they're just sad and they watch people through the window and ruminate about how crap their lives are. And then versus action-packed, plot-driven shocks, horrors, spectacle that we see in science fiction, crime, spy stories, which are a child of detective stories, thrillers, psychological thrillers, you see, horror stories, science fiction, I already said that, and pornography. So, which side are you on? I know which side Lucy Farmer's on. Anyway, getting back to the story. So, but I think that was interesting. And then we get, oh yeah, so we're going to circle back, as they say, and we're going to talk about the explained supernatural. So I was talking about the evolution of the Gothic novel at a gallop, and talking about how it gave rise to all these other forms of genre fiction. But many of the authors of the sensational Gothic style novels, right through the Victorian period, were conscious they were being looked down on by their snooty, romantic and realist peers, other writers. They were considered the bottom of the pile, and so they would make. And I said, to admit that you believed in superstitions and the spiritual aspect of life, apart from the carefully prescribed role of, in this case, the Church of England, that meant you were a fool. So what you tried to do was you go, yeah, but it wasn't really supernatural. And this, of course, leads to the evolution of Scooby-Doo. I've said this many times. It leads ultimately to Scooby-Doo, which is, of course, I don't think it is modern anymore, but a sort of late 20th century example of the explained supernatural, which was started by Anne Radcliffe in her big romances in the 1790s. She was the Mother Radcliffe, Coleridge called her that. Was she gave birth, and yeah, I don't like birthing either. You give birth. You don't have to make a verb of birth. I know I'm contradicting myself. And gifting, I don't like that either. You give a gift. Oh, I don't like those ones. Just call me old-fashioned. But yeah, that's it. This is an example of the explained supernatural. And it could, because my point about the detective novel is that this could have been on the Detective Channel, couldn't it? Easily. But it's a Christmas story, and it's got a ghost in it, except he isn't a ghost. Although there may be a ghost, because she leaves the door open to that, suggesting at the end that even though the ghost wasn't the cause of any of these things, it was the handsome cabin boy. There may be a ghost still. Yeah, but I thought it was very, very witty, and I loved her interactions with her aunt and her observations about all the village worthies who were drawn in comic style, but I didn't feel unkindly. They weren't kind of, as sometimes villagers are in books, now even, but certainly, yeah, now, even now. You get a folk horror story now, and the villagers are evil, stunted, twisted, bigoted, um, emotionally and intellectually stunted, as I said, people. Even in modern novels, they are. And certainly this has been a theme of the metropolitan literati, to look down their snouts at ordinary country folk like myself. Although I live in a city now, so I don't know how that. But I've lived in the country a lot. Big show of hands fan, actually, as well. So there we are. That's probably all I want to say. Everything I tell you especially if I say it 3 times, which is why I repeat myself, it's true or not. Anyway, Christmas is coming. I'll probably end up doing at least one more before Christmas, maybe two. But stay tuned. Oh, yeah. And, if you like what we do here, I say we, I am the queen. Oh, there we are. So if you like what I do here, without the royal plural, please share. Tell your mates. Anyway, goodbye for now.